Today, we're hitting the endless highways of Texas, where every mile hides a chilling secret. From deserted backroads where headlights vanish without a trace, to small towns where travelers were never seen again. Get ready for 20 of the most disturbing true Texas road trip horror stories. That will make you think twice before driving these lonely routes after dark. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. Tuesday, September 19th, 2023, 11:38 p.m., westbound on I-20. 20 minutes past Pecos and not quite to the Toya exit. The temperature on my dashboard read 81 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind was light from the southeast. The sky was moonless, so clean and dry that the Milky Way looked like spilled salt. And the only smell inside the cab was coffee and the faint chemical temps of wet wipes I kept in the console. I had driven out of El Paso after the crew signed off on a compressor install. It's a kind of job that runs long because one more bolt never quite lines up, and someone has to tell a story you have heard 5 times already. The plan was a cheap motel. In Pecos, 6 hours of sleep, then Abilene by lunch. My truck is a 2012 F-150 with a stubborn idle and a habit of forgiving me. The odometer had just rolled past 218,000, which feels like an accomplishment you can't brag about to anyone who doesn't live in Texas. I was in that late-night trance drivers know. The one where the radio keeps you company and the green exit. Signs feel like they are addressing someone else. The air through the wing window had that sweet desert cool slipping under the day's leftover heat. I had half a bottle of gas station cold brew sweating in the cup holder and a cooler in back, with a bag of ice fusing itself into a single cloudy stone. The only complication was construction around Pecos, orange barrels and flashing arrows that pushed me past the exits with the motels and into the indifference between towns. When the next green sign lifted out of the dark and announced TOYAH, in block letters I read the smaller line too, no services. I had a quarter tank, which in West Texas is either a cushion or a prayer. My eyelids had gone heavy and itchy, the way they do when you have been awake too long in nothing but headlight world. I told myself I would pull off, stretch, maybe park under a street lamp for 10 minutes and eat a peanut butter packet. There would be a wide spot to turn around. There always is. The ramp floated me down into stillness. Interstates sound like rivers, and you don't realize how loud they are until you step out of them. Here, there was nothing but the sound of my own tires and the faint hiss of air slipping past mirrors. The overpass dumped into a 2-lane blacktop, the kind with a white center seam patched with tar like a scar. To the right, a handful of one-story buildings hunched along what must have been Main Street ones. Low roofs and false fronts and window glass holding more dust than reflection. I rolled slow idled past a cinder block building with a barber pole whose red had faded to pink and then to nothing. A storefront with letters scabbed off the glass so the word groceries could be guessed, but not confirmed. A church that had no cross but did have a polite white door. Dirt had drifted into little dunes in the angles where sidewalk met wall. A metal awning ticked as it cooled. The town didn't feel hostile or even sad. It felt like a room someone had stepped out of for a moment and forgot to step back into. One street lamp worked. It stood a block ahead, throwing a warm cone that looked solid enough to lean on. As I watched it, A porch light 2 doors down blinked on. A round yellow eye full of light washed a stoop where no one stood. Then, across the street, another light woke, and another, as if a person were walking along and the town was switching itself on for their convenience. It was the way you see lights come to life ahead of you when you are on a motion sensor trail, except there was no motion I could see. I told myself what anyone would tell himself. Timers. Sensors still thought they mattered. Heat from the truck. Somewhere, a nightcat moved. The explanation worked for the first 3 lights. It felt thin by the 6th. I parked without thinking about it, easing the truck's nose into the street lamp's halo, and opened the door so the night could step in and make its introductions. Dust, a little sweetness like old gasoline, a smell of dry wood. The air was warmer than it had been up on the interstate, as if the buildings were holding the day's heat like old bones. At the exact center of the light, where bugs had mapped their own spinning constellations, lay a white card. I shouldn't have bent to it, but bending felt like the same instinct as checking a mirror when you pass it. The card was thick, cheap, glossy. One side was blank. The other side had blue stamped letters that read "Open 24 hours." Below that, a hand-drawn arrow pointed down a side street toward a squat rectangle under a corrugated awning. "Okay," I said into no one. Then I said it in a different tone, like I was trying to make a joke. Okay, the side street held a gas station that had been retail in the era when prices had a leading one. The pump island had 2 metal guardians with glass cylinders on, top and little ladders of numbers etched around them. The windows showed coolers with beads of water on the inside like breath. A red cash register sat on the counter with the stiffness of a museum piece. When I pushed the door, it complained with a tired bell, and the air inside smelled like bleach and motor oil and something that remembered being clean. "Hello," I called. My voice sounded too loud. Shape filled the doorway in the back and held still long enough for my brain to reach for the mannequin explanation. Then it moved in a way that mannequins do not. He was tall and slab-shouldered, wearing a white shirt that had known whiter days and a navy name patch with the thread washed into an undecidable blur. He had a jaw that looked square until he smiled, and then it softened like people's jaws do when they are trying to tell you the thing will be fine. "Cash only," he said. It was the kind of voice that isn't used to its own sound. "Yeah, I've got cash," I said. "Pumps work." "Turn it twice," he said. He did not point. You would think that would be strange, but what struck me was the way his eyes flicked, past me to the window and then back, like someone listening at the door of an empty room. "Not once," he added. "Twice? How much can I get?" I asked. Because that felt like a real question in a place where the math might not be the math I knew. As much as you need to get where you're going. He set something on the counter. 'Twas a small brass key with a yellow fob like a motel uses. The tag didn't say a room number. It said pump in block letters that looked like they had been inked by hand. "You paying first or paying after?" "After," I said, and immediately wished I had said first. He nodded, as if the test had been administered and a grade had been assigned. Back outside the town had made additional decisions. 3 more. Porch lights had come on down the block in a curve that traced where the road would bend. The bulbs were all the warm old kind, and they made the dark between them feel like the dark was behaving. I carried the key to the closest pump, found the lock on its metal faceplate, and turned the key once. Nothing. I turned it a second time and felt a soft mechanical consent. The little mechanical clock face that measured gallons shivered and reset to zeros. When I pulled the lever, the glass cylinder filled with a clear liquid that I am going to call gasoline, because that is what the sign above it promised, though it had less scent than it should have, like a memory of gasoline. I watched it pour, and listened for the rumble in my tank, and only then realized how quiet the town was. Even the bugs were staying home. "Turn it twice," I said under my breath, testing the sound in my own mouth. I always repeat strange instructions to make them belong to me. The nozzle clicked once, and then once again, which is not a thing older pumps do. I stopped at 8 gallons because caution felt like a new thing I owned. When I set the handle back, I heard movement in the gravel. It was probably a night cat. It looked like a dog when it crossed the field of light, lean and hungry as a shadow with hips. It didn't look at me. It avoided the exact center of the light like it disliked getting any on its fur. Inside, the man stood at the register with his hand poised over a row of buttons as if his fingers had been raised before the town went quiet and only now found permission to lower. 8, I said. "You got snacks. I'll grab a water." "Water's cold," he said, "and when?" I opened the cooler door. I felt the damp breath against my cheeks. There were 3 bottles, lined in perfect order. I took the one on the right because I always take the one on the right. I put a 5 and a 20 on the counter. The register rang in the old way, a half bell with a brass taste to it, and a paper receipt emerged with serrated teeth. The numbers were wrong. It showed 8 gallons at 0.00 per gallon. It showed a subtotal that matched the 25 I had put down. It showed change due at 0.00. It showed the time as 12:17 even though my phone said 11:58. There was one more line. Printed. Lighter than the others, a line my eyes wanted to ignore. After short on paper, the man said. He reached under the counter and came up with 4 singles and some coins anyway. He set them on the counter as if he had practiced setting that exact stack 1,000 times. "You headed to Pecos." It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. "Yeah, get some sleep," he said. "You might wake up." "Isn't that the idea?" I said, trying to make my mouth put a chuckle into the room. He didn't laugh. He watched me the way people do. At open caskets. Outside again, the porch lights were making a new shape. They were on ahead of me down the curve of Maine, but now they were on behind me too. As if the town wanted to show me the full path I could take and the full path I had already taken. The cone under the street lamp where I had found the card had emptied of bugs. I felt for the card in my pocket and found it warm as a coin. The arrow on it had smeared a little from my thumb. I told myself I was tired and that I had given too much attention to a place that wasn't asking for it. I got in the truck and turned the key, and the engine cleared its throat and agreed to help. The radio came on by itself. I don't leave. It's set to any station. I scan until something I want comes along. What came along was a thin edge of a voice that could have been 2 people talking at a distance or a choir of static, teaching itself to sing. From inside that hiss came a sound I knew from when I was 5 and my granddad called his bird dogs. A click of tongue on teeth. Twice, patiently, then again. Something in my back tightened in a way that is about pulling a memory up and pushing it down at the same time. I shut the radio off. It clicked back on. I shut it off again. Stayed off, and the absence of it felt wider than the road. I eased along Main with the lights switching on ahead of me and then winking out behind me. Always the same distance in front and back. When I reached the end of the block, the street teed into another paved road whose center line had lost the argument with the sun decades ago. To the left, the lights announced themselves like an usher's hand. To the right, there were no houses, but a church shape made of roof and dark told me there would be one soon. My GPS had lost its nerve and spun a little compass in the corner of the blank gray rectangle. I turned left because left was what the arrow on the card had asked of me, and because obeying took less energy than inventing. The town showed me a water tower with the letters Toya stenciled on it in black paint that had flaked in a way that made the O look like an I missing a piece. The road crossed a set of train tracks and the crossing arms lowered in front of me. There was no headlight, no horn, no hiss of brakes. Then something moved across. large and quiet, only outline and weight, the way you see a storm at a distance. When lightning gives you the shape and the rest is guesswork. The last car passed and the arms lifted and I rolled forward on tires that had learned how to be careful. I found the overpass again, the one I had rolled down a few minutes ago. It looked the same until I was on top of it. The westbound lanes were right there at shoulder height, humming with trucks that blew heat and diesel at me, except they weren't. The lanes were there in their shape and their paint. Nothing passed on them. No red taillights up ahead, no white eyes coming toward me. I told myself it was a lull so complete it felt impossible. I told myself this even as I watched a moth tumble through one of the lamps like ash. When I came down the far side, the lights picked up the thread and led me back toward the grid of streets. I would never know whether it was my decision or the town's when I cut the wheel and broke their pattern. I took a right where a left had been suggested, and then another right, making my own corner. The town blinked and then obligingly lit that route too. I took a left and then a wrong left, and then I drove into a street that narrowed like a throat. On one side, a line of houses settled with their faces turned away from me. On the other side, a chain-link fence ran the length of the block. Behind it stood a squat metal building whose doors had been welded shut by a man who believed in thoroughness. A sign hung crooked on the fence, white with hand-lettered blue words. It said City Shop. It said Do Not Enter. It said Trespassers will be accounted for. The third line made me stop. I rolled the window down. The wind smelled like rain that would not arrive. From the building came the small, dry sounds that metal makes when metal cools. Then from somewhere behind me, the click came again, tongue to teeth. Not a dog call this time, but the sound of someone coaxing a child to come toward the camera. Twice, exact and patient. My hand found the key in my pocket and made a fist around it so hard the brass left its letters in my skin. I put the truck in reverse and backed out and almost clipped a mailbox that had no house behind it. The main road forgave me and took me back to the tracks. The arms were up and the road beyond looked like it had always wanted me to have it. As I crossed, my passenger window fogged in a circle the size of a human face. No breath made it. No hand wiped it away. It appeared and cleared the way fog on glass clears, which is to say, from edges to center, as if someone had learned the ritual and liked to do it. I felt myself swallow in a way that picked a side between anger and fear. I chose anger because it makes your hands move. I put the truck into a faster gear than was wise and followed the lights down to the overpass and up onto it, and gave the wheel a little shake like you give a vending machine to convince it that you have already paid. The interstate showed me nothing moving. It showed me 3 dead armadillos and a stretch of mirage that pretended to be water. I crossed the bridge and the town unfurled the lights again, and I let it, because fighting a current takes practice. When I came to the block with the working street lamp, I braked and looked at the cone where the card had been. There was no card now. I took the card out of my pocket to prove to myself that of course there would not be a second one. This is when I noticed the arrow no longer pointed the way it had pointed when I picked it up. The ink smear ran in the same place, but the arrowhead had been redrawn to aim me directly across the street at a building with a wooden door and a bell on a leather strap. It was a small cafe once, or the shape of one. The glass held white letters that had once spelled out breakfast and now looked like someone had erased them with a damp hand. I told myself not to take the bait. I told myself to stay in the truck and drive slow around the block until the town. Got bored and I could waste gas finding the ramp back up like a rat that finally figures out the maze. I told myself I could turn off the headlights and that lights like these can't lead what they can't see. I turned the key and killed the engine. I sat there while the silence entered through the vents. Then from across the street, someone spoke my name. "Tom," the voice said. a syllable coming through the glass like it had fallen down a well and learned to enjoy the echo. No one who knows me calls me Tom. My mother used to when she was mad. My grandfather did when he wanted me to come down from the porch. The voice didn't sound like either of them. It sounded scuffed and flat and tired of asking. I left the headlights off and opened the door, and the bell on the cafe chimed without the door moving. The town does not need you to comply with the obvious physics when it has subtler tools. I crossed the street and put my palm on the wood of the door, and it was warm. Body warm, like a person had just leaned there to eavesdrop. The knob turned. Under my hand, inside the room smelled like burned coffee and sugar packets and the heel of a loaf of bread. There were 4 tables, each with a napkin dispenser and a glass salt shaker, and a counter with 2 stools. Behind the counter sat a woman with hair the color of iron and hands flat on the laminate. She wore a white blouse that had no sweat stains at all and no dust anywhere on it. The first thing she said was, "Cash only." "I already bought gas," I said, and then felt stupid for talking about money to a woman who looked like she had been waiting for a different sort of transaction. "You from around here?" "Tom," she said, and did not put the question mark on the end. "No." "You keep a light on where you live," she said. "By the back door." "I do," I said. The admission felt like when you tell a small truth in a room that has been expecting a confession. "You leave it on for you or for somebody else?" "Me," I said. Then, because I heard how selfish that sounded, I added, "And for the dog when he goes out, you don't have a dog." She smiled like she had stolen something and wanted me to guess what. "What is this place?" I said. I wanted to put force into it, but I couldn't find the place in my body where force lives. "This is where I tell you that if you go on like this, you will not get home," she said. "Or if you do, you will bring something home that you won't. Put down." She brought her hands together like a person making a bird with their shadow. "You won't put it down even when you think you have put it down. It will find that light by your back door and sit there and learn your house." "Pumps work," I said, "because the mind wants something solid to talk about when the floor gets unreliable." "Turn it twice," she said. And watching her say that, I realized the man's voice and the woman's mouth matched only in that phrase. The words wore the same boots. I went back outside because fear that stays in a room grows legs. The town's porch lights were making a new line now, drawing a diagonal that cut behind the water tower toward the low smear of mesquite. I had this sudden, certain knowledge that if I walked that line, I would find a place where the lights ran out and the ground fell away. I did not know if it would be a ditch, a river, a quarry, or a depression in the dirt big enough to be its own story. I knew only that it would ask for something from me and that the asking would sound like charity. I did what tired men do. I picked the one thing I could control. I got back in the truck, and this time I backed away without looking in the mirrors. I let the tires find their path, and I trusted the feeling of a front end swinging to point toward the street with the tracks at the crossing. The arms were down again. I stopped and waited with my hands at 10 and 2, like a school picture of a driver. A train came, long and slow and quiet. The boxcars matte and painted in names that had not owned them in years. It was not that the train made no sound, it was that it made the wrong sounds. No clack, no horn, only the small breath of air being moved. The last car cut the air and revealed a road I recognized. The arms lifted. I drove forward on a certainty that was not earned by the evidence. The overpass ramp rose like hope. At the top, the westbound lanes flickered, as if the desert had remembered how to throw illusions back at old men. Then a set of taillights appeared, at a distance, and grew not larger but more numerous, as if 2 taillights had convinced their friends. A tractor trailer roared past on the far lane, and then a white pickup. And then a cattle hauler that exhaled a sour, warm smell that belonged only to cattle. Sound came back like the ocean arriving. I merged, not because there was an opening, but because my truck thought it belonged. I wanted to look down into the town as I flew by and see the light pattern break and the night retake what it had loaned. When I looked, the town offered me nothing but its shape. The working street lamp was out. The porch lights were all off. The water tower watched with its ruined dough and did not bless me. I did not stop in Pecos. I drove past motels that promised cable and truck parking and forgot to promise sleep. I drove until the lines on the road thickened and braided and turned into the kind of fatigue you can only outrun by stopping. In Monahans, I pulled into a roadside motel whose neon advertised vacancy in a letter pattern that made a V look like a U. The woman at the desk handed me a plastic tag with a number 14 on it and a real key, the kind that works like a small prayer. She said, "Long night." "Just a drive," I said. "You want ground floor," she said, and not as a question. "You look like you're carrying something you'll need to drag." In the room, the air conditioner was set to Arctic, and the bedspread had a pattern that repeated too stubbornly. I set my wallet and my phone and the brass key with the pump fob on the dresser without planning to. I showered until the hot ran low, and then I stood in the cold because sudden discomforts feel like power when the other kind of discomforts are sneaky. I fell asleep with the bedside lamp on and the television muttering a weather report for a county I was not in. At 3:11 a.m., the bedside lamp went out and then back on. I sat up, heart misbehaving, and reached for the brass key because my hand knew it wanted it. My fingers closed on the wood of the dresser and found nothing. The key was gone. I do not mean that I could not find it. I mean that I could feel the absence. It had left the way you can feel where a ring used to be when you have worn it long enough. On the nightstand, a paper receipt hid under the TV remote. I picked it up. It had serrated teeth and the same faint print as before. 8 gallons at 0.00. Subtotal 25.00. Change to 0.00. Time 12:17. The last line. Lighter than the others, made a choice it had not made before. After, it said, and then typed my last name correctly spelled, and then a comma, and then a word that belongs only to family. It is a nickname no stranger uses and no adult has used for me since elementary school. I left at dawn because dawn makes cowards into drivers. The sky toward Odessa turned thin and pink, and a line of black birds stitched itself across the horizon the way they do when they are pretending to be a thread. The truck sounded like a truck. The radio played farm reports and a pastor offering to pray with callers who had lost their way. I told myself a story about stress and caffeine and heat and loneliness. I told it well enough to get to Abilene and then home. I drove into my carport at 6:40 p.m. on Wednesday, and the sensor light by the back door did what sensor lights do. It woke up, snapped awake, and made a pool on the concrete big enough for a dog that is not mine to sit in. I didn't look at it long. I put my bag down, opened the refrigerator, and stared at condiments like they could make a defense. I slept badly and woke 3 times. Each time, sure, I had heard the bell on a door I do not own. In the morning, I checked the bedside stand and the dresser and the truck. The brass key was not there. I didn't tell anyone about it. A thing not spoken sometimes behaves. 2 weeks went by. Work took me to Midland and back, and then to a little job in Andrews. I avoided the Toya exit the way you avoid glancing at the passenger seat after a funeral. The second Tuesday after, at exactly 12:17 p.m., my phone vibrated and showed a notification from a weather app I don't remember downloading. It said heat advisory for Reeves County. It said avoid strenuous activity. It said stay in the shade. It said open 24 hours. I deleted it and drove to a supply house and made polite talk about gaskets. That night, taking the trash to the alley, I looked up and realized my block on the south side of Abilene had discovered a new habit. The porch light at my place clicked on as I opened the gate, and the one at my neighbor's blinked a second later. And then the one across the alley woke, and then a line of small, warm circles traced all the way to the end of the block, as if a person were walking. When I stood still, they stayed on. When I took a step, they went on ahead. My street has never been synchronized about anything. Not lawn heights or political signs or the proper way to back out of a driveway. I stood with the trash bag in my hand and felt that same muscle in my back choose anger again, because anger at least lets you move in a straight line. I took 2 steps and the lights took 2 steps before me. I said, loud enough for anyone to hear, if anyone had been out, no. The word did not act as a spell. The lights did not go out. They waited the way Toya waited, patient and too awake. I keep the light by the back door on now. I keep it on, not for the dog I do not own, but because I am not interested in discovering what sits there learning my house if I put it out. Sometimes late, when I am reaching for sleep and not finding it, when a train passes far away and the sound reaches me like a memory of iron, I hear a small, patient click of tongue to teeth from the direction of the kitchen, twice inviting me to step into a light I already know the shape of. I do not go. I lie still, and I try not to count the seconds until my porch light turns on by itself. And then, one after another, the neighbors' lights come too. And then, one night soon, I suppose I will look out and the lights will not stop at the end of time. The block. They will line the road all the way to the highway, and once they have a path, they will not forget it. It was October 14th, 2021, a Thursday. The kind of autumn evening in Texas where the air dips just enough to remind you summer is gone, but not enough to justify a jacket. I was driving west on Ranch Road 32, the stretch locals call the Devil's Backbone. If you've never been on it, it's a winding ridge road that snakes through the hill country, flanked by cedar breaks and limestone cliffs that drop into valleys below. Around dusk, it's beautiful in a way that's almost unsettling, like the landscape is holding back something you're not supposed to see. That night, I left San Marcos a little after 6 p.m. The sun was dropping low, spilling orange light across the ridges, and by the time I reached mile 13, fog had started to roll in, the kind that comes fast and clings low to the ground. I remember checking the clock on my dash. 6:47 p.m., the radio was off. Just the sound of my tires on asphalt and the occasional creak of the suspension when I took a curve. The fog wasn't thick enough to make me slow down much, just enough to blur the outlines of the mesquite and oak along the road. Then, not even a quarter mile past the mile marker, a deer crossed in front of me. A doe, moving quick, her head jerking like she was spooked. I braked hard, heart jumping, and watched her vanish into the fog. 5 minutes later, another deer crossed. Same size, same uneven gait. I told myself there were plenty of deer out here, that it was nothing unusual. But then, a third crossed, and I swear to God, it looked exactly the same. The same twitch of the ears, the same awkward dip of the head. I actually muttered, "No way," under my breath. I know deer look alike, but this wasn't just similarity. It was repetition. I glanced at the clock. 6:52 p.m. I had the eerie sense that only seconds had passed, not minutes. The fog was thicker now, almost white against the high beams, and the road seemed quieter than it should have been. No crickets, no night birds, just the low hum of my engine. Another curve, and the deer came again. Same one. This time, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Its coat wasn't sleek brown anymore, was patchy, ragged, like the fur had thinned with age. Its movements were slower, stiffer, like its legs ached. I gripped the wheel tighter and muttered, "You're just tired. That's all." I even reached over and slapped the radio on, just to break the silence. Some country station crackled in, but the signal faded almost instantly to static. When I looked back at the clock, it read 6:47 again. Not 6:53, not 6:55, 6:47. Same as when I first saw the deer. I don't know how to describe the sensation that hit me then, except to say it felt like the road had folded in on itself. Like I was stuck in a loop. The fog pressed harder against the windshield, swirling, almost pulsing, like it had weight. And right on cue, the deer appeared again. Only now it was hunched, ribs showing under its hide, eyes clouded over. It stopped in the center of the road and turned its head toward me. Not just a glance, it looked at me, locking me in place. Its breath came in slow bursts that fogged the air. For one impossible second, I thought it whispered something. A sound. Shaped like a word, but too warped to catch. I swerved around it, my pulse hammering. When I checked the rearview mirror, it wasn't there. Not on the road, not in the fog. Just gone. The clock blinked again. 6:47. My phone, which I had tossed on the passenger seat, lit up too. Same time, 6:47. No signal. Just that number frozen. On the screen, by then, I was sweating despite the cool air. I rolled down the window for a breath, but the fog poured in, damp and cold, carrying a faint smell of rot, like wet leaves left too long in a ditch. I gagged, rolled it back up, and gripped the wheel until my knuckles were white. I told myself, just keep driving, just make it through. But the road wouldn't change. The same bend, the same scraggly cedar, the same low dip where the deer always stepped out. Each pass, the deer looked older, more decayed. Until finally, it didn't even resemble a deer any more like a hollowed shape of one. Bones straining under thin flesh, eye sockets empty and black. I shouted, "Stop it!" into the fog, like yelling at the road itself. My voice sounded swallowed, eaten by the mist. No echo, no response. The wheel vibrated in my hands, like the car itself was straining against something unseen. When the deer came again, what was left of it, staggered in front of me and collapsed. I slammed the brakes so hard my seatbelt dug into my chest. The car stopped inches from its body. It twitched once, then stilled. I sat there, breathing hard, the engine rumbling low. Then, with sick certainty, I saw its body dissolve into the fog as though it had never been there. My headlights cut through empty air, and the clock on the dash blinked one last time. 6:47. When the fog finally thinned, it was sudden, like curtains being pulled back. I was past mile 13, the road stretching. Clean and quiet ahead of me, stars sharp in the sky. My phone buzzed with notifications. Signal back. The time read 8:19 p.m. I had no memory of the missing hour and a half. No idea how I traveled the distance. I never take the Devil's Backbone after dark anymore. Locals will tell you it's haunted by soldiers, settlers, outlaws, all the usual hill country lore. But I know what I saw wasn't a ghost in the way people mean. It was the road itself, folding time, showing me something it shouldn't. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I still hear the faint scrape of hooves outside my window. And I can smell that damp, rotting fog. I don't know what happens if you don't make it through the loop. And I don't ever want to find out. It was late May of 2016, a Saturday night just outside of Johnson City, Texas, on Highway 281. I remember the date because I had been driving back from San Antonio after visiting a friend who had just moved into a new apartment. The weather that day had been suffocatingly hot, but by nightfall, the skies opened up and the rain came down in violent sheets. I left around 9:30 p.m. and the storm had already turned the hill country roads into black rivers under my headlights. The clock on my dashboard glowed 10:14 when I passed the Blanco County line. windshield wipers thumping furiously against the glass. The highway was nearly deserted. The storm had driven most sane people inside, and the few cars that passed me going the other way sent up walls of spray that clung to my windows. My tires hummed against the wet pavement, and every few miles lightning would tear across the horizon, flooding the world with stark white light. The air inside the car smelled like damp upholstery, and outside the air was heavy with the metallic temps of wet asphalt. It was just after 10:30 when I saw her. She was standing in the median, right where two stretches of Highway 281 divide before merging again a few miles later. At first, I thought she might be a trick of the lightning, because no one in their right mind would be standing there in that storm. But she was clear and solid in my headlights. A woman in her mid-30s, maybe older, barefoot in the grass. Her white dress bone dry despite the rain hammering down. She didn't flinch at the thunder or the passing cars. She just stood there, still as stone, one arm half raised as though she had been about to wave. My stomach tightened, the way it does when you realize something isn't right, but your mind can't catch up to what your body already knows. I slowed, more out of instinct than choice, and as I passed her, she turned her head slowly and looked directly at me. Her hair was slicked against her face, yet she looked untouched by the storm. Her eyes caught mine for only a second, but I swear they were too dark, like her pupils had swallowed the rest. The road behind me was empty. Against my better judgment, I pulled over about 50 yards ahead. My first thought was that maybe she had been in some kind of accident, or maybe her car had broken down and she had wandered to the median. When I checked my rear view, though, she was gone. The median stretched out empty behind me. Nothing but the wet grass whipping in the wind. I sat there for a long moment, wipers squealing, heart hammering. Then I heard it, a faint knock against the passenger side window. I jerked around so fast, I nearly pulled something in my neck. She was standing there, inches from the glass. Same dry dress, same flat expression. Her lips moved, though I couldn't hear her words over the pounding of the rain and the thrum of my car's engine. I cracked the window just an inch. "Are you all right?" shouted, trying to make my voice sound steady. Her voice slid in quietly, like it wasn't touched by the storm outside. "Can you give me a ride?" Her tone wasn't pleading. It was flat, even almost rehearsed. I should have driven off right then, but something about her calmness made me hesitate. "Where are you headed?" "To the cemetery," she said. That gave me pause. "Which one?" "The one by the church." Her eyes flicked to the highway ahead. "The one that isn't there anymore." My scalp prickled cold. I grew up around Central Texas. I knew that stretch of 281 well enough to know the cemetery she was talking about had been relocated decades ago when the highway expanded. The graves had been moved in the 70s. I remember hearing older relatives talk about it, how careless the relocation had been, how some families never got their loved ones' remains back. I swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I don't think that cemeteries." She cut me off with a faint smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Please." The storm seemed to intensify then, as though the sky was waiting for my answer. Thunder cracked so close, it rattled my teeth. Against every instinct screaming in my gut, I reached across and unlocked the door. She slid in gracefully, though I never saw her pull the handle. She smelled faintly of earth and something sweet, like honeysuckle gone sour. The seatbelt lay flat against her lap, but I don't remember seeing her buckle it. Water pooled around her bare feet, yet her dress stayed dry. I pulled back onto the highway, trying to steady my breathing. The road was empty, swallowed in sheets of rain, and for a few minutes the only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the drumming on the roof. I finally cleared my throat. "So, what's your name?" She looked at me with those dark eyes, unblinking. "They called me Sarah." The way she said it, "they called me," made something twist in my chest. Not "my name is," not "I'm Sarah." I nodded, trying to focus on the road. "Sarah. Okay. Which way am I going?" "Straight," she murmured. "I'll tell you when to turn." We drove like that for miles. Every so often, lightning would split the sky, and in those moments, I swore her reflection in the window didn't quite match her movements. Once, her reflection turned toward me before she did. Another time, it lingered facing forward after she had already glanced my way. The storm began to ease as we approached Marble Falls, though the night stayed heavy with mist. Around 11:15, she placed a hand lightly on my arm. Our skin was ice cold, colder than the air conditioning ever got in my old Honda. "Here," she said softly. I slowed. The turnoff was a gravel road, half overgrown, one I knew hadn't led to anything in years. My headlights caught the remains of a crumbling stone wall and a rusted gate half sunk in the dirt. "This used to be it," she whispered. My chest tightened. I had heard about the old church and cemetery that used to sit out there. It's abandoned and finally torn down after vandals got to it in the 80s. But there was nothing there now. Just the husks of mesquite trees and weeds choking the gravel. I turned to tell her that, but the passenger seat was empty. The seatbelt was still buckled. The faint smell of honeysuckle and damp earth clung to the air. My stomach flipped and I slammed the brakes, throwing the car into park. My hands shook as I fumbled with the dome light, but the seat was as bare as if no one had ever been there. Then, from somewhere in the mist outside, I heard her voice again, clear as if she were sitting right next to me. "Thank you for the ride." Came from the passenger side, but when I whipped my head around, there was only the fog pressed against the glass. That was enough. I threw the car into drive and tore out of there, gravel spitting beneath my tires until I hit the asphalt again. I didn't look back. Not once. When I finally got home that night after 1 in the morning, my shoes left damp prints across the carpet. I hadn't stepped outside once. I don't drive 281 at night anymore. And when storms roll in, I stay off the road entirely. Because sometimes, when the thunder shakes the windows, I catch a faint scent of sour honeysuckle, and I hear her quiet voice in the back of my head. "Can you give me a ride?" And I know if I ever answer yes again, I won't make it back home. It was late September when it happened. One of those evenings in West Texas where the air still carried the heat of the day long after the sun had sunk behind the horizon. I remember it was Saturday, September 23rd, 2023, because I had driven out near Marfa with a friend, trying to catch the famous Marfa lights that people always talk about. The weather was clear, not a cloud in the sky, the stars stretching endlessly in that way you only see in the desert. The wind was faint, carrying with it the faint smell of mesquite and dust. We had parked my old Ford Ranger off a county road. Headlights off, just waiting in the dark with the faint glow of the dashboard clock marking time. It was 10:47 p.m. when I glanced at it, mostly because we hadn't seen anything unusual yet. My friend Luke was already bored, fiddling with his phone and muttering about bad reception. I was leaning against the hood, eyes adjusting to the black spread of desert when I noticed something that didn't fit. At first, it was a sound, a low hum, faint and steady, like the buzz of power lines, but there weren't any out there, not for miles. It wasn't the wind either. This was constant, a vibration you felt in your chest if you stood still long enough. I walked a little down the roadside ditch, thinking maybe it was a generator on some ranch nearby. But as I moved, it grew louder. That's when I saw it dot about. 50 yards into the scrub, a long stretch of fence ran parallel to the dirt road. The fence itself wasn't strange, just the typical ranch wire strung between weathered cedar posts, but the barbed wire glowed. Not brightly, not like a neon sign, but with this dim bluish-white light that pulsed softly as if it were alive. Every few seconds, the glow would ripple, traveling down the length of the fence like water disturbed by a stone. The hum came from there. I was sure of it. "Luke," I called quietly, not wanting to sound like I was spooking myself. "You see that?" He groaned, but when he stepped over, his phone light cutting through the brush, he froze. "The hell is that?" "Looks like it's plugged into something." We both laughed a little nervously because there was no pole, no power source, nothing but desert. The nearest ranch house was a speck of lights half a mile away. The fence stood there humming, glowing faintly like it was waiting to be noticed. Luke said what we both were thinking. "We should get a picture." He pulled up his phone, aimed, and snapped a shot. Nothing weird at first glance, its barbed wire reflecting like it had frost on it. Then he cursed under his breath. "What the? Look at this." He showed me the screen. The photo looked wrong. Behind the fence, instead of desert scrub, the picture showed a road. Perfectly straight, black pavement stretching back into a fog that wasn't there in real life. There weren't any headlights, no signs, just a dark road vanishing into nothing. I glanced up, half expecting to see it with my own eyes, but the desert was just desert. When I looked back at the phone, the road was still there. "Take another one," I whispered. He did. Same thing. The glowing fence, and behind it, a road. That wasn't there. We stood in silence, just listening to that hum sink into our bones. Luke tried to laugh it off, saying maybe his camera glitched. Maybe it was long exposure, picking up something strange with the light. But he wouldn't take another step closer to the fence. I could see it in his eyes. Neither would I. Something about it felt wrong. Like if we touched it, or even crossed the barbed wire, we wouldn't be in the same place anymore. That road, that empty road, felt less like an image and more like an invitation. I don't know why, but I pulled out my phone and snapped one picture too. My hands were shaking, but I caught the fence straight on. The same result. There was the road again, but in mine, something else appeared. Far back in the distance, on that dark stretch of pavement, there were headlights. Faint, small, but coming closer. The problem was, they weren't in front of the fence. Only in the picture. Luke swore and demanded to see it again, and when I held it up, the headlights were brighter, closer than they had been seconds before. I lowered my phone, looked with my own eyes. Nothing. Desert silence. Raised it again, closer still. My heart felt like it dropped through my ribs. "We're leaving," Luke said. He grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the truck. I didn't argue. As we moved away, the hum grew fainter, but the air still felt heavy, charged. We didn't speak until the headlights of the Ford cut through the dirt track. Heading back toward town. That night in the motel, we compared the photos again. Luke still showed the empty road. Mine still had the headlights. Closer now. Too close. I deleted it without thinking, but even after it was gone, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that hum in the quiet of the room, like it was still inside me. Here's the part I haven't told anyone else. When I got home 2 days later, I plugged my phone into the charger and it buzzed with a new notification. It wasn't from any app I recognized. It's just a thumbnail preview of an image. My heart froze. It was the same road, same fence, same fog. Only this time, the photo wasn't taken from the outside. It was from the middle of that blacktop road, looking out toward a fence that glowed faintly in the distance, like a window you couldn't get back through. And there, just behind the wire, I could see 2 faint figures standing. One of them was me. I didn't open it. I didn't save it. I powered the phone off and left it face down on the counter for the rest of the night. But even now, weeks later, sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear that low, steady hum. And I wonder if that fence out there is still glowing. Waiting for someone else to get too close, waiting to show them a road that doesn't exist. or maybe it does. Maybe it's always been there. And that night, we just stumbled onto the wrong side of what's supposed to be real. I don't think I'll ever go back near Marfa. But the worst part is, I can't shake the feeling that one night, I'll wake up, look out my window, and see that same blacktop stretching out into the fog, leading somewhere I don't want to go, humming softly, waiting for me to follow it. It was late September of last year, around 10:30 at night, when I stopped at Rest Stop 19 on Interstate 45 in Texas. The weather was still warm, even though fall was creeping in. Maybe low 80s, and the air had that heavy, humid feel that sticks to your skin. I remember because I had just rolled down my window for some fresh air. And instead, I got hit with the smell of asphalt, faint diesel fumes from passing trucks, and the sweet, sharp scent of pine from the tree line that ran along the back edge of the parking lot. I'd been driving since early afternoon, leaving Dallas on my way to Houston for work. And I was tired in that way where your eyes feel dry and scratchy, but your body keeps humming with nervous energy from too much gas station coffee. Rest Stop 19 wasn't much different than any of the others you see along that stretch of highway. A couple of old vending machines humming under fluorescent lights, a row of restrooms that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 90s, and a few benches bolted into concrete pads near the edge of the lot. A handful of tractor trailers were idling in the far corner, and 2 sedans were parked closer to the entrance. Nothing about it should have felt off, but the whole place had this stillness that put me on edge. Even the cicadas had gone quiet, and the buzz of the fluorescent tubes was the loudest thing in the air. I got out, stretched, and decided to grab a snack. The vending machines were lined up against the side of the building, their glass fronts glowing. I dug around in my pocket for change, fed it into the slot, and punched the number for a bag of barbecue chips. The machine clunked, the spiral turned, and the bag fell. But when I bent down to grab it, I noticed something taped to the back of the bag, a folded piece of paper yellowed at the edges, like it had been sitting there a while. My first thought was that it was some prank, maybe a love note or a piece of trash someone had shoved in, but when I unfolded it, the handwriting made me pause. It was written in shaky block letters, like someone had been rushing. In 10 minutes. A red pickup will pull in. Do not talk to him. I stood there staring at it, confused and more than a little unsettled. I looked around the rest stop, but nobody was watching me. No one was nearby except a trucker sitting in his cab with the glow of his phone lighting up his face. I shoved the note into my pocket, told myself it was just someone screwing around, and leaned against the machine to eat the chips. But I couldn't stop checking my watch. I don't know why I did it. Maybe morbid curiosity. Maybe that voice in your head that tells you not to ignore something strange. But I waited. And sure enough, almost on the dot, a red pickup rolled into the lot. Old Ford, loud muffler. Paint faded but unmistakably red. It parked diagonally across from me, idling with its headlights still on. I froze. The driver was just a shadow behind the windshield, but I felt him looking at me. My throat went dry. I remembered the note's words, "Do not talk to him." After what felt like forever, he killed the engine, opened the door, and climbed out. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, and he started walking toward the vending machines. Toward me, I panicked. I tossed my empty chip bag in the trash and power walked back to my car, trying not to look like I was running. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there, staring straight ahead. He reached the machines, looked around, then pulled a drink, and leaned against the side of the building, sipping it casually. He never looked directly at me, but I swear I could feel his eyes. That's when I remembered the note. My hands were shaking as I pulled it back out of my pocket as if it might give me the next step. But the paper was blank now. Same yellow edges, same fold lines, but no writing. I sat there with my heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I shoved it back in my pocket, started the car, and drove out of there faster than I should. I tried to put it out of my mind, chalk it up to fatigue and paranoia, but it didn't end there. 2 weeks later, I was driving the same stretch of highway on my way home. Against my better judgment, I stopped at rest stop 19 again. Mostly because I wanted to prove to myself it was all in my head. I went to the vending machine, bought a soda, and when it dropped, there was another note taped to it. My stomach sank. I peeled it off with trembling fingers. This one read, "In 10 minutes, your phone will ring. Do not answer." I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. I didn't even want to wait this time, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I went back to my car, locked the doors, and sat there gripping the wheel, watching the seconds crawl by on the clock. 9 minutes passed, and I was sweating so badly my shirt stuck to my back. 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, almost exactly 30 seconds later, my phone lit up on the console. Unknown number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I could feel every nerve in my body screaming at me not to touch it. On the 4th ring, it stopped. The screen went black, and that was it. The silence afterward was so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. When I finally found the courage to look at the note again, just like before, it was blank. That was months ago, and I haven't been back since. But I can't stop thinking about it. Who's leaving the notes? How do they know? Are they warnings or are they traps, forcing me into choices I don't even understand? Sometimes, late at night, I take the 2 slips of paper out of my wallet just to make sure they're still blank. But when I tilt them under the light, faint. Impressions of the original words still show through, like scars pressed into the fibers. I don't know what happens if you ignore the note. I don't know who's behind it. And I don't know why it has to be rest stop 19. But the worst part is, I can't shake the feeling that one day, maybe soon, I'll find myself pulled back there again. And when I do, I don't think the next note will let me walk away. It was September 12, 2021. The kind of Texas night where the air felt heavy even after sunset, thick with the smell of mesquite and desert dust. I had been driving west since late afternoon, leaving Austin behind and pushing toward Big Bend. My plan was simple: make it to Terlingua before midnight, park my rented RV near the old ruins, and catch the sunrise over the Chizos Mountains. I'd been on the road since around 4 p.m., and by the time I hit Marathon, the sun was already bleeding into the horizon, turning the sky a layered mess of orange and dark violet. I filled up with gas there, but I didn't top off the tank, something I'd regret hours later. By the time I left Alpine, it was full dark. The road stretched empty, just 2 lanes of asphalt disappearing into desert nothingness. The radio had lost all signal, so the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of the RV's cabinets. My headlights washed over dry scrub and patches of thorny ocotillo that looked like skeletal fingers against the night. I remember checking the clock on the dash. 9:46 p.m., a hot wind buffeted against the RV, carrying that sour desert smell like earth baked too long in the sun. Somewhere past Study Butte, the gaslight flickered on. I cursed under my breath. The last station I'd passed was long behind me, and I hadn't seen another set of headlights in miles. I slowed the RV more to stretch the gas than for safety, because the road had become a winding strip that dropped into dips where shadows pooled. The moon was full and bright, but it didn't comfort me. If anything, it made the desert look. Wrong silver light clinging to every cactus, every rusted fence post, like the land itself was glowing faintly. Around 11 p.m., with the fuel needle kissing empty, I pulled off near the crumbling ruins of what looked like an old mining shack. I told myself I'd just let the RV rest until morning and drive into Terlingua when the sun came up. The place looked like a ghost outpost, broken stone walls slouching into the dirt. And behind them, the wide open desert stretched to black mountains in the distance. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. Without the hum of the motor, I became aware of how alone I was. No traffic, no crickets, just the faint sound of wind scraping across the sand. I made some ramen on the RV stove and sat at the tiny table. The windows fogged a little from the steam, and when I wiped one clear, I froze. For a second, I thought I saw a pale shape out by the ruins, not moving, just standing. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I blinked and leaned closer, but when I squinted, there was nothing there. Just moonlight painting. The crumbled stones. I laughed at myself, forced the noodles down, and told myself I was seeing things. The desert plays tricks on tired eyes. Everyone knows that. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Around midnight, I lay down in the narrow bed at the back of the RV, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I started to drift, I swore I heard something faint outside, like the crunch of boots on gravel. Once or twice, I sat up, holding my breath, straining to listen. The air through the cracked window smelled of dust and faint rot. And I thought about coyotes, or maybe some drifter wandering through. That idea didn't comfort me. At 12:47 a.m., I heard it for real. A knock, not on the door, but against the side of the RV, just one. Sharp eye shot upright, heart hammering, and stared into the dark. My phone had no service, no way to call anyone. I waited, every muscle stiff, till finally I worked up the courage to peek through the blinds. Nothing. The desert stretched pale and empty under the moon. I told myself it was the wind knocking something loose. But then came another sound closer, this time at the window above the sink. A dragging noise, like fingertips trailing across glass. I bit my lips so hard, I tasted blood. "Hello," I said, instantly regretting it. My own voice sounded too loud in the tight space. No answer, just silence, heavy and unnatural. I gripped the RV's little kitchenette knife and sat there, whispering to myself that it was an animal, that maybe the desert wind had pushed a branch against the siding. But the ruins outside had no trees, nothing tall enough to scrape the window. Minutes dragged. The clock hit 1:12 a.m., then 1:23. Just when I thought maybe it was over, something breathed against the thin glass, slow, fogging it, like someone standing inches away. I didn't dare move. I kept my eyes locked on the window, watching the faint mist spread and vanish, spread and vanish. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe a minute, maybe 10. Then silence again. I sat like that until my legs went numb. Eventually, exhaustion forced me down. I don't even remember falling asleep. What I do remember is the dream, if it was a dream. I was walking through the ruins in the moonlight. The air felt wet, colder than it had any right to in the desert, and from behind the broken walls came shapes, not people exactly, but outlines, tall and thin, their faces smooth, pale like bone. They didn't move right. They bent forward like they were smelling the air. One turned toward me, and even without features, I knew it was staring. When I tried to run, my legs wouldn't move. I jolted awake just before sunrise, drenched in sweat. The windows were clear, the air still. But when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. In the dirt all around the RV were prints, not boots, bare feet either. Long, narrow impressions, each toe too pointed, too deep in the sand, as if something heavier than me had been circling all night. They led from the ruins straight to my door, to my window, then back again into the desert until they vanished. In the scrub, I didn't bother making coffee. I didn't bother brushing my teeth. I turned the key, and by some miracle, the RV sputtered to life with the last drops of fuel. I drove on fumes until I rolled into Terlingua and nearly collapsed. At the gas station pump, I never told the clerk what I saw. What could I have said? That something without a face stood outside my window, breathing. That the desert left its mark in prints no human could make. I just paid, filled the tank, and kept driving, telling myself I'd never stop in the desert at night again. But the thing isn't, this is the part I can't shake sometimes when I wake up late. I swear I hear it again. That soft drag of fingertips across glass. And when I check the window in the morning, there's the faintest fogged circle, like someone was breathing there while I slept. It was the evening of April 12, 2023. Just after 6:30 p.m., the air along Highway 6 was warm, with that soft heaviness you get in Texas during springtime, carrying the smell of wildflowers and fresh-cut grass. The sky was streaked with orange and pink as the sun sank low, casting long shadows across the two-lane stretch of road that cut through the countryside between Bryan and Calvert. I was driving north after finishing a work trip in College Station, windows cracked enough to let in the humid breeze. My phone had been buzzing with notifications, but I ignored them, wanting to enjoy the quiet road. About 15 minutes north of Bryan, I saw a handmade wooden sign pointing toward a bluebonnet pullout. I'd driven Highway 6 dozens of times and never noticed it before. Maybe it was new, or maybe I'd just been too focused on getting where I was going. The pullout was small, just a gravel patch off the shoulder with a narrow dirt path leading into a wide field of blooming bluebonnets. Dozens of cars pass that highway every day, but at that moment the spot looked completely deserted. I slowed down, signaling out of habit, though no one was behind me. I'd been meaning to send my mom some flower pictures since she couldn't get around much anymore, and bluebonnets were her favorite. I figured I'd stop for 5 minutes, get a couple shots, and keep driving before it got dark. When I pulled into the gravel lot, I noticed how quiet it was. The hum of the highway dulled behind me, replaced by an almost unnatural stillness. I cut the engine, and for a moment, all I could hear was the faint rustle of the flowers in the breeze. The field was beautiful acres of deep blue spreading out under the fading sky, broken only by the occasional oak tree. I got out of the car and followed the dirt path a few yards in, crouching to take a couple pictures. The smell of the flowers was strong, sweet, but with a faint, musty undertone that made me wrinkle my nose. I took a few steps deeper, angling for a better shot where the flowers seemed thicker. That's when I noticed something odd. Between the clusters of bluebonnets, I could see little white markers poking up just above the flowers. I thought at first they were plastic stakes or maybe old irrigation markers, but when I got closer, I saw they were tiny wooden crosses. Dozens of them. They were simple, some barely more than sticks bound together, others painted white, but all small, no taller than a foot. They stretched in uneven rows across the field, half hidden by the flowers. My first thought was that it was some kind of community memorial, maybe for pets. I'd seen that before on rural land, but the longer I looked, the more unsettling it became. There were too many, rows and rows of them disappearing into the distance. Some were fresh and bright, but others were weathered and gray, leaning sideways, as though they'd been there for years. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but for some reason, my hand hesitated. It didn't feel right, like photographing a graveyard you weren't invited to. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned to leave. That's when I heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, just a faint shuffle, like something moving through the flowers a few yards away. I froze, scanning the bluebonnets, but all I could see was the sway of blossoms in the wind. Another shuffle followed, closer this time. Then, a soft cough. Human, hello. I called out, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked a little. No answer. I took a few steps back toward the gravel lot. My boots crunched on the dirt path louder than I expected. I glanced back at my car, only about 20 yards away, but that short distance felt strangely far. The air seemed heavier now, pressing against me. The smell of the flowers had grown stronger, cloying, almost rotten. I caught movement to my left, a ripple in the flowers, as though something large was crawling just below the surface. "Hey," I tried again, louder this time. I didn't mean to trespass. "I'm just leaving." Silence. I started walking. Faster toward the car, heart thudding when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, matching my pace. I spun around. The path behind me was empty. Just rows of flowers and those endless crosses. But the footsteps didn't stop. I could hear them crunching softly, though there was no one there. My throat went dry. I broke into a jog, fumbling in my pocket for my keys. I risked one last glance back, and I swear on my life I saw something then. Not a person, not exactly. More like a figure pressed down into the bluebonnets. Its body hidden, only the top of a pale head visible above the flowers. It was still facing me. I didn't wait to see more. I sprinted the last few yards to my car, threw the door open, and slammed it shut behind me. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before shoving them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of that gravel lot, sending up a cloud of dust. I didn't look back, not once. I drove for nearly half an hour before I realized I was still gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My shirt clung damp against my back. The air in the car was suffocating, but I didn't dare roll the windows down. I finally pulled into a gas station outside of Calvert. I sat in the lot for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. I pulled out my phone, half expecting to see the pictures I'd taken earlier, but the gallery was empty. Not a single shot of the field, the flowers, or the crosses. I told myself I must have forgotten to hit save, that it was just some strange memorial and maybe some local kids messing with me in the flowers. That's the explanation I cling to. But here's the thing. I drove that same stretch of highway. 6 a week later, during the day, determined to prove to myself it was nothing. I slowed down where I remembered the pullout being. There was no sign, a gravel lot. Just an unbroken stretch of road bordered by ranch fences and fields of wild grass. I don't know what I stepped into that evening, but I know one thing for certain. If you're ever driving Highway 6 in springtime and see a cheerful little sign for a bluebonnet pullout, keep driving, because beneath those flowers there are more crosses than you'll ever want to count, and something is waiting among them. It knows when you step into that field, and it doesn't like letting you leave. It was late on a Wednesday evening, October 14th, 2020. I remember the day clearly because it was one of the first cool nights of that fall in Central Texas. The kind where the summer heat finally loses its grip and the air carries that sharp, almost metallic edge of incoming cold. I had just left a friend's house in Burnett around 10:45 p.m. after helping him haul some equipment into storage. My route home always took me across Lake Buchanan, the long stretch of FM 690 where the road narrows and crosses the water near the dam. I'd driven it countless times, but that night felt different, though I couldn't have told you why at first. The air was calm, the lake like a sheet of black glass reflecting a pale sliver of moon. There were no other cars around, just the rhythmic hum of my tires and the faint smell of cedar wafting through my cracked window. About halfway across the bridge, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, faint glimmers below the surface of the water, too steady to be moonlight. I slowed down a little, leaning forward over the steering wheel. That's when I realized what I was seeing. Headlights. two pale beams under the surface, moving parallel to me, matching my speed as if some vehicle was submerged and driving the drowned road that once ran beneath the lake before they built the dam decades ago. I told myself it had to be some kind of reflection. Maybe my own headlights bouncing back strangely. I even switched my brights on and off just to test the theory. But the beams below didn't react. They stayed steady, fixed under the water, keeping pace as I drove. I remember whispering out loud, "No way." The bridge is long, nearly a mile, and as I continued, the submerged lights continued too, always at the same angle and distance from me. My knuckles tightened on the wheel, and I fought the urge to pull over. The rational part of my brain kept offering explanations: boats with underwater lamps, some kind of construction equipment, maybe even divers with strong lights. But the beams were too far apart, too bright, too perfectly aligned like headlights. On an old car, by the time I reached the far end of the bridge, my pulse was hammering. I told myself I'd leave it behind once I hit the tree line, but when I glanced in the side mirror, I froze. The lights were still there, faint and ghostly beneath the water, lingering at the edge of the bridge. Then, as my headlights swept across the rocky shoreline, I could swear I saw the outline of an old road vanishing beneath the lake. I pulled over about a mile later, killed the engine, and sat in the silence. The only sound, the faint ticking of my cooling motor. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend. "You get home yet?" I typed out. "On the way," but I didn't send it right away. My fingers hovered because I didn't know how to explain what I'd just seen. I convinced myself it was stress, fatigue, or some weird trick of angles and water. I started the truck again and drove home, deliberately avoiding any glance back toward the lake. The next morning, I mentioned it to my friend. He laughed at first, then got quiet when he saw my face. He told me something I didn't know. Before Lake Buchanan was filled in the 1930s, entire stretches of road and several small communities were drowned beneath it. Old farmhouses, bridges, and even a cemetery were left behind under the rising water. Fishermen still pulled up strange things on their lines from time to time. "What you saw," he said, "was probably nothing. But people around here talk about the drowned road. Say you can still see cars driving it on certain nights." I didn't laugh over the weeks that followed. I avoided that bridge at night. I'd take the long way around, even if it added 30 minutes to my drive. Once, though, I had no choice but to cross it late, close to midnight. And when I did, the lake was black and calm again. I tried not to look, but curiosity got the better of me. This time, there were no lights beneath the water, just silence, just darkness, and that should have been a relief. But when I rolled down my window, I could hear something faint over the water. Not frogs, not crickets. It was the low, unmistakable sound of an engine idling somewhere below the surface. It's as if a car were waiting at an intersection deep in the drowned world, where no one should be driving anymore. I don't cross Lake Buchanan at night anymore, and sometimes on still evenings when the wind dies down and the lake turns glassy. People say you can see those headlights pacing the cars that cross the bridge. I know I did. And whatever is driving them, it isn't coming back up. It was late summer of 2022 when I decided to take a long drive down FM 170, the stretch everyone in West Texas calls River Road. If you've never been out there, it's about as isolated as a paved road can get in the United States. It winds along the Rio Grande, wedged between the river's dull shimmer and the endless mesas and cliffs. I had been living in Presidio for a year, teaching at the tiny school there. And one Friday night, I figured I'd drive east toward Terlingua, just to clear my head. It was around 7:30 in the evening when I filled up my car at the Stripes gas station, grabbed a Dr. Pepper, and set out. The weather was hot, dry, but not unbearable. The sun was low enough that the cliffs to my left threw long shadows across the asphalt. There were stretches where I didn't see another vehicle for 20 minutes. My radio wasn't picking up much, just static, except for a few weak country stations out of Alpine. I had my windows down, letting in the smell of desert, dust, and creosote. The first strange thing happened about 40 minutes into the drive. As I rounded a bend where the road cut through a high wall of rock, I noticed something moving across the face of the cut. At first, I thought it was a goat or a coyote scrambling along the ledge. But when my headlights caught it, my stomach tightened. It was black, jointed, almost insect-like, but too big. I only saw it for a second before it pulled itself over the top of the cliff. Its limbs bending the wrong way, glinting in the fading light like wet obsidian. I actually laughed nervously, telling myself it must have been a trick of the shadows, or maybe a buzzard hopping awkwardly. I tried to shake it off, but a mile later my radio, which had been nothing but static, suddenly hissed and cleared. A voice came through, faint but distinct. "Bubba." I froze. Nobody calls me that except my family, and I hadn't heard it since I was a kid growing up outside of Houston. It was my childhood nickname, something only my mom or my older brother would use. The voice repeated it. "Bubba, you listening?" It sounded warped, like it was coming through water. But the inflection was eerily familiar. I yanked the knob, flipping through every station, but it was the same, just static. My pulse was hammering by then, and I remember saying out loud, "No, nope, not tonight." I turned the radio off completely and drove on with the windows still down. The desert air suddenly feeling heavier. Around 9 o'clock, the road got darker. No moon yet, just stars beginning to crowd the sky. The cliffs pressed in closer and the Rio Grande glittered on my right. That's when I noticed another car in my rearview mirror. Its headlights appeared suddenly behind me, too close, like it had pulled out of nowhere. I slowed a little, thinking it would pass, but it just stayed there, tailing me. I could make out the shape of a sedan, maybe silver or white, but I couldn't identify the make. 10 minutes went by like that, the car glued to my bumper. I rolled down the window further and waved my arm out, signaling it to go around. No response. I was about to pull over onto one of the gravel shoulders when the headlights blinked off. Just like that. 1 second they were filling my mirror. The next, the desert behind me was pitch black. I slammed my brakes, swerved to the side of the road, and twisted in my seat. There was nothing. No headlights, no taillights, no car. The road stretched empty and silent in both directions. I sat there for maybe a full minute, the only sound the ticking of my engine cooling. My scalp prickled like I had ants crawling across it. I forced myself back onto the asphalt and drove faster this time, keeping my eyes fixed forward. But the air inside the car felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. At one point, I swear I heard whispering, faint, like it was coming from the back seat. I jerked my head around and saw only my backpack lying there. The final stretch before Lajitas is the darkest. No lights, no houses, nothing but rock walls and desert brush. I was maybe 20 miles from town when the radio, which was still off, crackled to life on its own. The same voice as before, calm, measured. "Don't stop, Bubba. Whatever you do, don't look in the mirror." That was the moment I realized my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed to check the rear view, to see what might be there. But I kept my eyes locked on the yellow line ahead. I could feel something, though pressure, like weight behind me, as if the back seat wasn't empty anymore. The air smelled different too, sharp and metallic like blood or ozone. I kept driving, repeating out loud, "Just a few more miles, just a few more miles." My voice sounded too loud in the car. I thought about pulling into one of the gravel shoulders again, but the memory of that voice telling me not to stop kept me moving. When I finally saw the glow of lights from Lajitas in the distance, I felt tears sting my eyes. I pulled into the tiny motel lot there, slammed the gear into park, and got out without even turning the engine off. The night air felt cool on my face, but the sense of something pressing close around me lingered until I walked under the buzzing floodlight near the lobby. Only then did I glance back at the car. The windows were fogged from the inside. I stayed in that motel room until dawn. Curtains shut, lights on, TV blaring, just to drown out the silence. I didn't sleep. When I finally stepped out at sunrise, my car was bone dry and clean, no sign of condensation. But when I opened the driver's door, I noticed the radio dial had been tuned all the way to the lowest AM frequency. I never listened to AM. I've driven River Road a few times since then. Always in daylight, always with other people. But I don't touch the radio anymore. I can't shake the memory of that voice using a name I hadn't heard in decades, telling me not to look back. Sometimes, late at night, when I lie in bed, I hear static faintly, even with everything turned off. And every so often, buried in the hiss, someone says my nickname, Bubba. It was the summer of 2019 when I found myself driving back from a job site outside Yorktown, Texas. It was a Tuesday night in late July. The air thick and heavy with that kind of humidity that sticks to your skin and fogs up your windshield every time you slow down. I'd stayed later than I intended, finishing some paperwork in my truck because the Wi-Fi at the site was spotty. By the time I wrapped everything up and started heading home, it was almost 11:30 p.m. The town was dead quiet when I passed through. Not many places were open that late, just a few bars spilling yellow light into the street. A gas station with a lonely clerk staring at his phone. Normally, I'd take Highway 72 and cut toward Cairo. But construction signs forced me onto a detour. Orange cones lined the road, pointing me toward an old county route I hadn't driven in years. I wasn't thrilled about it. That road wasn't exactly well maintained, but it was either that or turn back 20 miles. The detour eventually brought me to a 2-lane bridge that stretched over the San Antonio River. I remembered hearing something about this bridge from a coworker, a half-joking comment he'd made over lunch a year back. He said nobody liked driving over it after dark because for some reason the bridge counted your axles twice. Laughed it off as small-town nonsense, the kind of story you'd tell a new guy to see if he's spooked easy. The bridge appeared out of the night without warning, its rusted steel frame catching the glow of my headlights. The road narrowed sharply, and there was a faded wooden sign nailed to a post. Weight limit, 10 tons. Beyond it, a truss rose up like the ribs of some enormous animal. The air felt heavier as I slowed to a crawl at the entrance. Crickets and frogs screamed from the riverbanks. I swear the temperature dropped a couple of degrees. I told myself it was nothing, just fatigue, just late-night nerves. I eased the truck forward. The sound of my tires on the old planks echoed louder than it should have, a hollow thumping that made it feel like I was driving through the belly of something alive. The bridge was long, longer than I remembered, and the guardrails were low and rust-pitted. The river below looked black, reflecting only broken shards of moonlight through the trees. Halfway across, I felt it. A vibration, not from the truck, but from the bridge itself. It was subtle at first, like a second rhythm beneath my tires. My Ford has 2 axles, so you know the steady pattern you get. Front wheels, then rear wheels. But what I heard and felt was something extra. Each time the tires hit a plank, there was a faint second thud, lagging just behind the real one. Like another set of wheels rolling a half-beat out of sync with me. I slowed even more, down to maybe 15 miles an hour. The echo didn't stop. If anything, it grew sharper. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, leaning forward as if that would explain it. My headlights threw long beams ahead, and for just a split second, I thought I saw something flash in them, like metal glinting. Axles, wheels, a shadow of another truck pacing mine. But there was nothing there. Jesus, I muttered, trying to shake it off. You're tired, that's all. Then I heard it clear as day over the thrum of my tires. A second engine, low guttural, keeping pace with me. My radio was off, the windows up, and still I could hear it, just faint enough to make me question if it was real. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing but empty trusses behind me, receding into darkness. I rolled down my window, stuck my head halfway out. The night air hit me, thick with the smell of river water and rust. And under that, yes, I could hear it, another set of tires, another motor straining against the weight of the bridge. I pressed the accelerator, not too much, just enough to roll faster. The phantom sound rolled faster with me, each echoing thump perfectly aligned, but always half a beat behind. I made the mistake of glancing to my right, toward the open steelwork and the black water below. For a heartbeat, I saw headlights, not mine, glowing faintly under the surface of the river. I snapped my head back, gripping the wheel hard enough that my knuckles cracked. My chest felt tight. All I wanted was to be off that bridge. The far end was coming into view, dim asphalt and the shadow of the tree line. I pressed the pedal harder. The bridge groaned beneath me, the phantom weight matching every move. Then I hit the last few planks, and the truck jolted like I'd driven over a speed bump. The echoes stopped. The engine sound vanished. I cleared the bridge, pulling onto solid ground, and slammed on the brakes. My truck rocked to a stop just past the guardrail. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the empty road ahead. The crickets had gone quiet. Behind me, the bridge stood silent in the glow of my taillights. I could swear the steel frame looked darker now, almost wet, like it had soaked something up. I rolled my window back down, straining to hear anything. Nothing. Just the faint trickle of water far below. I don't remember the rest of the drive home. I must have taken every back road I could find, anything to avoid that detour. When I got back, I told myself it was fatigue, imagination, maybe. Even some weird acoustics of the bridge bouncing my own sounds back at me. But the detail that won't leave me alone, the part I know wasn't in my head, is those headlights under the water. They weren't faint like a reflection. They were sharp, bright, the way headlights look when they're coming right at you. I mentioned it to my coworker the next day, the same guy who'd first joked about the bridge. His face drained when I told him. He didn't laugh. He didn't even let me finish. He just said, "Don't drive it again." Then he told me why people talk about the axles. In the late 70s, a cattle truck overloaded with weight limits crashed through the guardrail on that bridge. It plunged into the river and sank, trapping the driver and 2 farmhands inside. Locals said you could hear the wreck for weeks after. Like the bridge itself kept replaying the moment, counting every axle it carried to the water. Some claim that on certain nights, if you cross it, the bridge tries to balance the count. If you've got 2 axles, it echoes 4. If you've got 4, it echoes 8. Always doubling, always trying to match the weight that went under. That night, I drove 2 axles across the bridge, counted 4. I haven't been back to Yorktown since. It was Friday, October 13th, 2023. Around 6:15 in the evening when I drove into Palo Duro Canyon, about 30 minutes south of Amarillo, Texas. The sun was starting its slow descent, spilling red light across the canyon walls, the kind of glow that makes the rocks look alive like they're bleeding under the sky. It was warm, unseasonably so for mid-October, hovering in the upper 80s. Though a breeze carried the faint smell of cedar and mesquite from the ridges above. I had been to the canyon a few times before, day trips mostly, hiking with friends, but this was the first time I had decided to drive the switchbacks alone, just to clear my head after a long week. I remember checking the time again as I passed the overlook near the visitor center. The sun had less than an hour before it slipped below the horizon. If you've ever been down there, you know the roads twist and fold like ribbons dropped into the earth. You start high on the rim, looking down at what feels like another world. And as you descend, the walls close in, the temperature changes, and the wind behaves differently. That's what struck me first, the wind. At the rim, it was warm, restless, shifting through the brush. But as I wound down the first major switchback, the breeze died out, replaced with stillness so complete that my ears almost rang from it. Then, halfway around the second curve, the wind came back, but it wasn't the same. It had weight, almost, like it was pushing against the car, and it carried a sound beneath it. Not a whistle or a rustle, but something layered like words half-formed and stretched thin by distance. I laughed at myself, rolled down the window, and muttered, "You're imagining things?" The canyon's famous for its strange acoustics. Hikers say you can hear voices from a mile away bouncing between the walls, so I told myself it was probably that someone yelling from the trails below, distorted into nonsense by the rock. Still, I cranked the window back up and focused on the road by the time I hit the third switchback. The voices, if that's what they were, had grown sharper. They rose and fell in a cadence that reminded me of arguing, hushed but frantic. Every time I slowed to turn, the wind seemed to find its way into the car, brushing across my ears like someone whispering too close. I swear I heard my name once, clear as day. Just one word in a low tone. Michael. I jerked the wheel slightly, heart racing, before shaking my head and forcing myself to focus. There was no one out there. No one knew I was even here. I pulled off at a small dirt shoulder to get myself together. When I stepped out of the car, the air hit me differently. Heavy, like standing in front of a storm that hasn't broken yet. My ears caught something under the constant wind, a rhythm like a breath pulling in and out, impossibly huge. I told myself it was the canyon itself, air funneling through the ridges. But then the smell hit me. Not cedar, not dust, but something metallic, sharp, like rust or blood. I froze. The smell grew stronger near the trunk. My hands shook as I leaned against the car, pretending to check my phone while every nerve in my body screamed at me to get back inside. The wind pressed harder, slipping under my jacket, and I swear to you, the voice was right behind me now. Trade, that was the word. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was guttural, rasping, like a throat unused to speech. I spun, but there was nothing, just red rock, shadow, and empty road. The air settled for half a second, and then the voice came again, woven into the gust that rushed around the car. Wait, your weight, the trunk. I stumbled back into the driver's seat and slammed the door, fumbling to lock it, even though I knew it wouldn't matter against whatever I was dealing with. My reflection in the windshield looked pale and wide-eyed, the canyon stretching dark behind me. My trunk. My mind raced. I had groceries in their canned goods, water bottles, a cheap folding chair. Nothing that should matter. I turned the key and the engine coughed alive. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but as I pulled back onto the road, the steering wheel resisted me, like something was holding the car, dragging against it. The wind shrieked down the canyon walls, and the words came clearer now, almost chanting, almost bargaining. Wait for silence. Wait for safe passage. I pressed the gas harder, but the car crawled like I was pulling a load heavier than it could handle. The trunk rattled violently, as if something inside was slamming against the metal. My heart pounded as I shouted, "Take it, take whatever you want." My voice cracked, swallowed by the roar of the wind. Without thinking, I yanked the car onto the next pullout, jumped out, and ran to the trunk. My hands fumbled with the key fob, slipping on sweat. When it finally popped, the lid rose as if yanked by unseen hands. The bags inside shifted unnaturally, bulging, then collapsing. One by one, the contents began to slide backward into the canyon, air water bottles rolling, cans dropping, the folding chair unfolding and tipping over as though invisible fingers were pulling them. The sound was wrong. Each item didn't just fall or clatter. They vanished mid-air, swallowed by the wind itself. The noise of their impact cut short as if erased. I backed away, whispering, "Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ." The wind stilled. The canyon went silent. My trunk stood empty, gaping like a mouth. Then the voice, softer now, but sharp enough to crawl under my skin. "Enough, go." I don't remember the drive back up the switchbacks. My mind was blank, my knuckles locked on the wheel. I didn't breathe until I was past the rim, headlights flashing against the flat scrubland leading toward Amarillo. When I stopped at a gas station on the way home, I opened the trunk again. Empty. Not just of groceries, but of the cheap rug. I kept in there the jumper cables, the box of tools I always carried. Everything was gone, stripped clean. That was 10 months ago. Since then, I've had dreams almost every week. Always of the canyon. Always of the wind carrying a voice just out of range. Twice, I've woken up to find red, gritty dirt on my bedroom floor. Once, I found it in the trunk of my car again. I can't explain that part. Never went back down there. Never opened the canyon roads again. But the weight in my trunk, whatever it was, feels like it followed me home. And sometimes, late at night, when the air gets too still, I swear I hear it again outside my window. That same rasping voice, patient, waiting, trade. On October 19, 2021, I was driving west along US 90, cutting across the flat, dry heart of Texas, on my way from Del Rio toward Van Horn. It was a Tuesday, about 11:15 p.m., clear skies, and the kind of night where the stars seemed pasted too. Close, shimmering sharp against a pale, endless sky. The air outside was dry and cool, dipping into the 60s. My phone showed no signal. The highway was empty, just 2 lanes stretched out through the desert. The asphalt cracked and faded in the center. I remember the steady hum of my old Ford Ranger's engine and how the beam of my headlights illuminated only the endless asphalt. Ahead, nothing unusual, just the kind of lonely drive truckers and late-night travelers know well. I had stocked up at a small gas station near Sanderson bottle of water, a pack of peanuts, and a cheap coffee in a styrofoam cup that was already cooling by the time I got halfway through it. The cashier, an older guy with sun-leathered skin, had told me, "Not much out that way tonight. Watch your gas." He said it like it wasn't just a reminder, but some sort of warning, like he knew something about the road ahead. I brushed it off, smiled politely, and left. About 40 minutes later, I saw them. A line of desert tan military-style trucks moving eastbound opposite me, toward Del Rio. At first glance, I thought it was a National Guard convoy. They looked like M35 Sonderhafts, the kind of vehicles you'd see in surplus yards or training exercises. They were spotless, though paint gleaming faintly under the starlight, canvas tops stretched tight, headlights bright. I counted 7 of them, all evenly spaced. What made me slow down wasn't the trucks themselves, but the way they moved, perfectly in sync. Each brake light pulsed in the same rhythm, like they were wired together. Red glow, fade, red glow again. My heart started sinking with the pattern without me meaning to. The timing was too exact, unnatural as they passed. My headlights cut across their windshields, and I realized I couldn't see anyone inside. No silhouettes, no outlines of drivers or passengers. Just empty seats behind spotless glass. Told myself, maybe the glare was fooling me, maybe the angle was wrong. But with each truck that rolled by, my stomach tightened. There should have been someone, at least shadows. There wasn't. And with every brake light flare, I felt my pulse stutter. By the time the last one went past, the road was dark and silent. Again, except for my own tires on the asphalt. I tried shaking it off. Military convoys run at night. Sure. Maybe the drivers were low in the seats, maybe tinted glass. I kept telling myself that, but the silence inside my cab grew heavy. I turned on the radio, twisting the knob, but every station came up as static. AM/FM didn't matter. Just a faint hiss that filled the cab, broken by strange little pops and whispers that didn't sound like radio interference. More like someone breathing too close to the mic. I turned it off. A few miles later, I noticed the faint red glow again. Up ahead, just on the edge of my headlights, brake lights flickered. The same pulse. I slowed. The convoy, but it couldn't be. They had passed me going east less than 10 minutes ago. And yet, there they were, rolling ahead of me westbound. Now, in my lane, the trucks drifting slow, like they were guiding me. I eased off the gas. My hands tightened on the wheel. I didn't want to pass them, but the road was too long, too empty, and eventually I had no choice but to catch up. The trucks moved without sound. No diesel rumble, no tire noise, no dust. Cloud behind them. Just a column of machines rolling perfect as clockwork. I edged left, tried to see if I could spot a driver. Nothing. No movement. No faces. Just empty cabs. The brake lights glowed again, and my chest clenched like my heartbeat was being pulled into their rhythm. I pressed the accelerator, overtook them, and forced myself not to look into the beds as I passed. But in my peripheral vision, I swear, I saw shapes, not cargo. Shapes that shifted as if they were watching me, leaning forward, waiting for me to glance back. My skin crawled. When I finally cleared the last truck and the highway opened up empty again. I felt a wave of relief until I checked my rearview mirror. The road behind me was dark. No headlights, no convoy, nothing. As if they'd never been there. The desert stretched endless on both sides. I thought about pulling over, but the idea of stopping felt worse than pushing on. I kept driving, fingers locked tight on the wheel, eyes flicking from the road to the mirror. At some point, I noticed my dash clock had frozen. 11:36 p.m. No matter how long I drove, it stayed the same. My phone, when I checked it, was black, dead, though I charged it in Sanderson. The only rhythm was my heartbeat. Still sinking to that red pulse I couldn't see anymore. I must have driven another hour, though time didn't feel right. The road bent slightly west, and that's when I saw it again. The convoy? Parked. This? Time pulled onto the shoulder, all 7 trucks lined up like statues. No lights, no movement. Just hulking silhouettes against the desert. As I passed, I couldn't help but look. Their windshields reflected my headlights back at me, and for a split second, I swore I saw faces inside. Not soldiers. Faces pale and slack, like they were pressed against the glass from the inside, staring out. Their eyes caught the light, not glowing, not alive, just reflecting, empty. I pressed harder on the gas. My truck rattled, engine whining. But I didn't care. I drove until the desert blurred around me, until the highway began to climb and the faint lights of Van Horn showed in the distance like a lifeline. When I finally pulled into a gas station at the edge of town, the clock on the wall inside read 3:02 a.m. My dash still said 11:36. My phone powered back on the moment I walked inside. As if nothing had been wrong. I told myself exhaustion had played tricks on me. Maybe I'd misread things. But the next morning, as I was leaving town, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time before merging back onto US 90. Behind me, far down the empty road, 7 faint red lights pulsed in perfect rhythm, just long enough for my heart to catch it again. Then they faded, leaving me staring at an empty stretch of asphalt that looked no different than any other desert road. I haven't driven that highway at night since. Would you like me to expand this further, to push it closer to 10,000 characters? With more buildup on the gas station stop, the long, empty desert, and the psychological details as the narrator loses sense of time and reality. It was the night of September 14th, 2022, when I first drove down to Indianola, Texas. I remember the exact date because the weather app on my phone had been buzzing all day about a heavy fog rolling in off Matagorda Bay. I had been restless that whole week, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain. I found myself following GPS directions toward a place that technically no longer existed. Indianola had been wiped off the map in the late 1800s by two massive hurricanes, its ruins swallowed by the sea and the marsh. I knew that much from history books. Still, when you type Indianola Shore into Google Maps, it offers you a route as if it's still a living town. And that night, I followed it. It was a Wednesday, around 9:40 p.m., when I left Port Lavaca. The air was sticky and heavy, the kind of Gulf humidity that clings to your skin like a film. Fog had already started pushing inland, thinning the streetlights into blurry yellow halos. I had my window cracked, the smell of salt and wet grass pushing into the car. The road stretched flat and empty, a thin strip of asphalt between stretches of marsh grass that rustled against the stillness. At first, everything felt normal. The GPS voice spoke in its usual calm tone, giving me turns I barely needed because there were hardly any roads out there anyway. I'd pass the occasional farmhouse light, a pale glow lost in the fog, but after a few miles, those two disappeared. That's when I started hearing it, the long, low bellow of a foghorn. It carried across the fields like something alive, low and steady, as if a ship were out in the bay, warning unseen travelers. But there shouldn't have been a ship that closed inland. And the strangest part, every time the foghorn sounded, my GPS would tick down a turn, almost as if it was guiding me step by step, deeper into land that hadn't been a town for over a century. I told myself it was atmospheric, maybe some refinery alarm carrying across the water, distorted by the fog. My rational brain clung to that, but it didn't explain the way the foghorn synced perfectly with the blue line on my phone. Each mournful note, another instruction: turn left in 300 feet, continue straight. In half a mile, arrive at your destination. I caught myself gripping the wheel tighter because my body knew before my brain did that something about this was wrong. The road eventually narrowed until it was little more than a cracked strip of pavement. My headlights caught the edges of it, breaking into gravel. The GPS still showed me within the grid of a town's tiny streets, labeled with names like Maine and Washington, but outside my window was only empty grassland and mud. No buildings, no lights. Just fog, so thick it pressed against the windshield in rolling waves. I slowed to a crawl, checking my rearview mirror out of habit. Nothing behind me but grayness swallowing the road. Then I saw them. Street signs. Not new ones, but iron posts leaning sideways, the green paint flaking off. 1 Reed Calhoun Avenue. I blinked hard because it wasn't supposed to be there. Indianola's streets had been gone for over 100 years, yet here they were, appearing one after another out of the fog. Broken stop signs, wooden posts with rotting boards as if pointing toward neighborhoods that no longer existed. My GPS arrow hovered perfectly aligned with them, like it knew the roads were still there, even when the land had erased them. I remember whispering out loud, "This isn't possible." The foghorn sounded again, louder, closer. My chest buzzed with it, like the air itself vibrated through my ribs. And then, faintly, I started to hear something else layered under its voices. Not clear words, but murmurs, many at once, as if a crowd stood somewhere just beyond the reach of my headlights. I slowed to a stop, rolled the window down. The night smelled like salt, iron, and something else. Something like wet wood that had been rotting underwater. The voices hushed as if they knew I was listening. That was when my GPS spoke again. Its voice wasn't the usual clipped digital monotone. This time it sounded strained, distorted, almost human. "You have arrived," it said. The words bled into static, drawn out and wrong. I looked at the phone. The blue dot pulsed in the middle of a street grid that showed Indianola's old port, even labeling Custom House and Market Square. My car sat in the middle of what should have been solid water. Yet my tires rested on cracked asphalt, and through the fog I could make out the faint outline of something ahead. A row of wooden posts, maybe, or masts. The foghorn bellowed deafening. Now, my headlights flickered once, twice, then steadied. And in that trembling yellow light, I swear I saw shadows moving. Figures half-formed in the mist, standing in rows along where sidewalks should have been. Some tall, some bent, none clear. They didn't move like people. They swayed like they were caught in water, hair and limbs drifting in unseen currents. The murmurs swelled into a low chant, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs it hurt to breathe. I knew without reason, without logic, that if I stepped out of the car, I wouldn't come back. My hand fumbled for the gear shift, slamming it into reverse. The tires spun on wet gravel, then caught. I turned the wheel too hard, headlights sweeping across the shapes in the fog. For an instant, one figure was clear. A man in old clothes, his face pale and blurred like a water-damaged photograph. His mouth opened wide as if he was screaming, but all I heard was the foghorn, blaring so close it felt like it came from inside. The car, I didn't look back again. I tore down the road, tires skidding, my phone rattling against the console. The GPS screen flickered like static and then went blank, leaving only the white letters, rerouting. The fog thinned with every mile I put between me and that place. By the time I saw the lights of Port Lavaca again, the air was clear, the sky open. My hands shook so badly I could barely park straight in front of my motel. The next morning, I opened Google Maps to see what route I had taken. The app showed nothing but blue water where it claimed I'd driven. The street grid was gone. I zoomed in and out, refreshed it over and over, but there was nothing left but marsh and sea. No Calhoun Avenue, no Market Square, just Indianola, listed under historic ruins. And yet, I can still hear it. Every so often, late at night when the Gulf weather pushes heavy inland, a low foghorn hums somewhere outside my window, miles from the water. I never open Google Maps anymore. When I hear it, I'm terrified it'll show me the way back. It was July 14th, 2022. Just after 10 p.m. when I pulled off Highway 54 near the small town of Lobo, Texas. I hadn't planned to stop. I'd mapped my trip so I could make it to El Paso by midnight. But I'd been driving since early afternoon, and the desert heat was wearing me down. I'd seen the faded green exit sign, Lobo. Next right, and figured I'd stretch my legs, maybe find a bathroom, grab something cold to drink. I didn't know then that Lobo wasn't really a town anymore. It was just an exit with nothing promised, a name without a place to back it up. The sky had that pinkish afterglow fading into indigo, and the desert around me looked like it had been baked into silence. The air outside was heavy and smelled faintly of dust and hot asphalt. When I eased off the ramp, the first thing I noticed was how dark it felt once I left the highway. No other cars, no porch lights, no glow of fast food signs. Just a single sodium street lamp flickering weakly over a cracked lot. And there, sitting under it, was a squat building that looked like it hadn't been open for years. A gas station, or what had once been one. The sign still stood above the roofline, Tex Fuel in blocky red letters. But half the bulbs were missing and the plastic had yellowed. The pumps were long gone, just rust-stained concrete islands and capped pipes. I almost turned right, back onto the feeder road, but I'd already pulled in, and something about the place made me curious. Against my better judgment, I killed the engine. The silence that followed was jarring, like stepping into a vacuum. No hum of traffic from the highway, no cicadas, just dead air. The station's windows were dark, but as I walked closer, I realized there was a faint glow inside, the kind you get from an old fluorescent light, struggling to hold on. My sneakers crunched against broken glass scattered across the concrete. The automatic doors were stuck open, wedged by dirt. And the air that spilled out smelled faintly of mildew and gasoline. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, then leave. But as soon as I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The place should have been gutted, or at least stripped bare. But instead, it looked like it was still trying to be a store. The shelves were dusty, but stocked cans of beans, faded chip bags, bottles of soda whose labels had curled from heat. The drink cooler hummed faintly, and I could see the dull green of glass bottles behind fogged plastic doors. The hum was the only sound. That's when I noticed the register. Sat on the counter, an ancient square thing with big plastic buttons. And it was on. The red LED display glowed faintly with zeros, the way it would when waiting for someone to ring something up. A little slip of receipt paper curled from the side like it had just been used. I wasn't proud of it, but I picked up a bottle of water from the cooler and carried it up to the counter. Part of me wanted to see what would happen. I set it down, and sure enough, the register beeped. It scanned it. The numbers appeared on the screen. $1.09. The sound startled me so much, I laughed nervously out loud, just to ground myself. "Hello," I called. My voice sounded small in the cavernous quiet, no answer. I dug $1 and a dime out of my pocket, set them on the counter. The drawer shot open with a metallic clang that made me jump. Inside was a neat stack of bills, crisp 10s and 20s, like the money hadn't aged at all. My dime rolled, hit the edge, and stopped dead against a quarter. The drawer slid shut on its own. At that point, my throat was dry, but not from thirst. I grabbed the bottle and cracked the seal. The water was cold, too cold. I hadn't felt any refrigeration when I opened the cooler door. But the bottle in my hand dripped condensation onto the counter. Something shifted at the far end of the aisle. Just a flicker, a suggestion of movement. I told myself it was my reflection in the glass door, but I didn't check. I just turned toward the entrance, telling myself I was leaving now. That's when I heard it. Pump 3's open. A woman's voice, flat, like it was filtered through an intercom. Except there were no pumps. Not anymore. I froze. The sound seemed to come from behind the counter. Maybe the PA system, but the little speaker box was coated in dust. I swallowed hard and started moving faster toward the exit. Pump 3's open, the voice repeated. Louder this time. Clearer. I could feel the vibration of it in my chest, though nothing else in the room stirred. No air moving, no buzzing light. Just those words pressing into the silence. Outside, the night had gone darker than it should have been. I could barely see my car under the flickering street lamp. I sprinted across the lot, water bottle still clutched in my hand, and dove into the driver's seat. The second I turned the key, the radio came on full volume static. No station, like someone had spun the dial and left it hissing. I killed it, threw the car into reverse, and peeled out, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't look back until I was back on the highway, headlights carving out a tunnel of road ahead. When I finally dared glance into the rearview mirror, I saw the gas station still lit. Not dim, not half-dead like before. Bright, every window glowing, like it was open for business. And for just a moment, I swear this is true, I saw figures moving inside. A man at the counter, a woman at the cooler door, a kid reaching up for candy. All frozen in place, but not empty, not gone. Like I'd caught them just before they turned to look at me. I didn't stop driving until I hit El Paso. I tossed the unopened water bottle into a dumpster behind my motel. Even through the plastic, it felt wrong in my hand, heavy like it held more than water the next morning. I tried to look up Lobo. Turns out it was a ghost town, abandoned decades ago. Some people tried to revive it in the early 2000s, but it never stuck. Google Maps still shows the exit, but when I dropped a pin on satellite view, the lot was empty. Just cracked concrete where the station should have been. No building, no lights. No register that still rang up cash. I don't know what I walked into that night. But I know this. If you ever find yourself driving Highway 54, tired and thirsty, and you see the Lobo exit, keep going. Don't stop. There are no services at Lobo. Not anymore. And if you ever hear a voice telling you, "Pump 3's open," don't answer. Just leave. It was late March. It's a kind of Texas spring night where the air holds that stubborn chill long after the sun's gone down. But the roads stay warm enough to breathe heat back at you through the tires. I was driving southbound on SH 130, cutting through the black stretch between Lockhart and Mustang Ridge. Around 11:40 p.m., the sky was cloudless, so clear it felt wrong. The stars looked too sharp, as if someone had scrubbed the night clean. My hands had that tense, twitchy grip on the steering wheel you get after a long day. Not from caffeine, but from the kind of tired where your muscles keep you alert out of spite. I was headed back from visiting a friend in Round Rock, aiming for lulling. SH2 130 is a toll road, but it's faster, emptier, and more unsettling after dark than most highways in Texas. The speed limit runs at 85 miles per hour. It's the fastest in the country. But I was hovering closer to 70. Not because I was worried about tickets, but because the silence of the road pressed on me like a weight. When you're the only pair of headlights in either direction, you notice things you'd never catch in the daytime shapes in the scrubgrass fence. Posts that look like figures. Shadows moving where they shouldn't. Around mile marker 419, I passed a call box. You don't see many of them anymore. Most are rusting relics with faded paint and dead wires. But this one looked strangely new. Bright yellow post, the words emergency call stenciled in reflective white, phone box freshly painted. No. Graffiti, no bullet holes. Out here, where even road signs get peppered with shotgun blasts. That was unusual. I drove another mile before the low fuel light pinged on the dash. I knew I had at least 40 miles left in the tank, but the sound made me curse anyway. Out here, gas stations close early. I passed the next exit, saw the sign for Mustang Ridge, and realized I wasn't going to make lulling without stopping. That was when I noticed the box in my rearview mirror. I must have looked back a second too long, because the car drifted slightly. Right, and my tires hit the rumble strip. The sound startled me, and I jerked the wheel. When I steadied, I looked again. The call box was just standing there by the shoulder, my taillights catching the yellow like it wanted to follow me. I don't know why I slowed down. Maybe I was spooked by the isolation. Maybe the light was playing tricks on me. Or maybe I just wanted a reason to get out of the car, stretch, breathe. I pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights ticking in the silence. The box was cleaner up close than it had any right to be. No rust, no grime, no dead bugs caked to the plastic cover. Looked installed yesterday. I lifted the handset. There was no dial tone. Instead, the line clicked and someone answered immediately. "State your emergency," a calm female voice said. I froze. Ah, I don't have an emergency. I was just checking if this worked. It does. Her voice had no background noise, no office chatter, no static, not even the faint hum of an open line. Just silence around each word, as though she were speaking directly inside my head. "Okay," I said, laughing nervously. "Well, that's good to know, Riemann," she said. "My full name, not just first or last. Stay on the line, please." My mouth dried instantly. I hadn't said who I was. My license plate wasn't visible to anyone not right behind me, and my phone was in my pocket. "Who is this?" "You're driving a black Honda Civic, 2015. You're at mile marker 419, and tomorrow at 8:27 a.m. you'll be in an accident at the intersection of FM 1185 and Magnolia Avenue. A blue pickup will run the light. You won't survive." I hung up so fast I nearly dropped the handset. My heart pounded in my throat. I shoved the phone back onto the cradle, backed toward my car, and slammed the door shut. For 10 seconds, I sat with the hazards blinking red against the empty highway, forcing myself to breathe. Then I floored it. The road unspooled under my headlights, but every mile felt heavier. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting headlights to appear, or worse, that box. Standing closer each time I looked back. When I reached Lulling, I pulled into a gas station, filled the tank, and sat in the lot under fluorescent lights, shaking. I told myself it was a prank. Someone could have cameras hidden in the call box. Maybe they ran plates through a database. Maybe it was all staged. But the way she said my name, the way she listed details, no one should know it, clung to me. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed her words until they lodged in my skull. 27 a.m. Magnolia and FM 1185. The next morning, I left an hour early. I didn't take Magnolia. I didn't even get near that intersection. I parked at a diner on the edge of town and waited, sipping coffee I couldn't taste. At exactly 8:27, I heard its screeching brakes, the sickening crunch of metal, the shouts of bystanders. I ran outside. At the corner, barely visible from where I stood, a blue Ford pickup had plowed through. The intersection, a black sedan was crumpled against a pole. The driver's side was crushed. The windshield had spiderweb cracks. Smoke hissed from the hood. I couldn't move. My Civic was sitting safe in the diner lot, but that car at the light tit was the same make, model, and color as mine. The cops and EMTs arrived fast. They pushed the crowd back. Someone threw a sheet over the driver's side before they even got the jaws of life out. I backed away, my legs shaking, and left before anyone could ask questions. I should have gone straight home. Instead, I drove north, back toward SH 130, mile marker 419. My pulse climbed with each exit. I slowed near the shoulder, scanning the scrub grass, the fence lines. The call box was gone. Not vandalized. Not broken. Gone. No post, no bolts in the dirt. No patch in the grass where it should have stood. I haven't driven SH 130 at night since. But every time I pass an emergency phone on any highway, I watch too long in the mirror, because I know. One night, when I pick up, she won't tell me about tomorrow. She'll tell me about tonight. It was a Thursday evening, April 11th, 2024. Around 8:30 p.m. when I left Beeville, heading south toward Goliad. The sun had gone down less than an hour before, leaving behind a low lavender glow over the mesquite and oak scrub. The temperature was still hovering around the mid-70s, humid, that sticky spring warmth that makes you roll the windows halfway down to let the air move. I was on Mission Road, that old stretch that parallels the San Antonio River before it curves back toward town. It's not heavily traveled at night, just ranch trucks, the occasional sheriff's cruiser, and people like me cutting through to avoid Highway 59. I had the radio on low, some Tejano station fading in and out with static. The hum of the tires against the cracked asphalt was steady, almost hypnotic. I remember glancing at the clock on the dash and thinking how dark it had gotten in less than 20 minutes. Out here, once the sun dips, the blackness just swallows everything. Streetlights. Just the thin beam of your own headlights cutting into the trees. About 5 miles outside Goliad, I saw him. A figure standing on the shoulder close to where the Mission Road turn narrows into a sharp bend. He was tall and lanky, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that looked too big for him, sleeves flapping in the wind. He held his thumb out in that old-fashioned way, not waving or looking desperate, just standing there like he'd been waiting. His face was shadowed under a brimmed hat. Normally, I don't pick up hitchhikers. My dad always warned me not to too many stories about people being robbed or worse. But there was something about this man that made me slow down. Maybe it was how still he stood, or maybe it was the fact that there hadn't been another set of headlights in nearly 20 minutes. It felt wrong to leave him there. I pulled over. The gravel crunched as my tires rolled off the road. He walked up slow, steady, not rushing. I leaned over and popped the passenger door open, headed into town, I asked. He nodded once. Goliad, he said, his voice low and flat. There was something old-fashioned about his accent. Clipped, like the way my grandfather used to talk. He climbed in, shut the door gently, and sat with his hands folded in his lap. He smelled faintly of dust and cedar, like an attic that hadn't been opened in years. We drove on in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the whine of the engine and the faint buzz of the radio static. Then I noticed something strange. I thought I heard him humming. At first, it was so soft I figured it was just the air moving through the vents. A kind of low drone, steady, vibrating against the dashboard. But when I turned the radio down, I realized it wasn't mechanical. He was humming a tune. It took me a second to place it. It was a hymn. One my grandmother used to sing in church, Abide With Me. The way he hummed it was slow, drawn out, almost mournful. It didn't come out of his mouth so much as through his nose, vibrating deep in his chest. I cleared my throat. That's a church song, right? I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer, just kept humming, looking out the window. At the dark brushland rolling past, the sound grew louder, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The hum wasn't just coming from him anymore, it was coming through the vents. Faint at first, but it spread, threading through the circulation system of my old Chevy. When I turned the fan dial down, the sound didn't stop. Filled the cab like the air itself was vibrating. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The road narrowed, and the trees pressed in closer, shadows flickering against the windshield. My pulse picked up, but I didn't want to show it. "Hey," I said, forcing a laugh. "You're making my car sing along." This time, he turned his head slowly toward me. His face was pale in the glow of the dash lights, thin cheeks hollow. Eyes, he gave me a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he opened his mouth slightly and began to hum louder. And I swear, the vents pushed the sound back at me in waves, almost harmonizing. I started to feel lightheaded. My own chest vibrated with the tune like it was inside me. Before I realized it, I was humming too. Not because I wanted to, but because the sound had wormed its way into my throat. Pulling the notes out of me, the two of us hummed together, the same hymn my grandmother used to sing at funerals. The same one they played when they buried my uncle. It wrapped around me, growing louder until it drowned out the sound of the road and the engine. I tried to stop, pressed my lips together, clenched my teeth, but the hum leaked through anyway, muffled but unstoppable. My throat ached. Okay, my hands went slick with sweat on the wheel. "Almost there," he whispered. "Kay," the first words he'd spoken since getting in. But we weren't. We hadn't even reached the Mission Espiritu Santo yet. And the town lights were still miles ahead. The bend we were coming to was tight, the kind you have to brake for. As I slowed, I glanced at the passenger seat. He was gone. The door was shut. The seatbelt still buckled across the empty cushion, but the humming was still there, pouring through. The vents crawling into my chest, forcing the tune out of me. My eyes blurred. The steering wheel shook. When I came out of that bend, my headlights caught the figure again. Standing on the shoulder, thumb out, same clothes, same hat. He looked right at me as I passed, his mouth moving in the shape of the hymn. I didn't stop. I floored it, tires spitting gravel, the hum growing louder until I thought the windshield would shatter. By the time I hit the outskirts of Goliad, my throat was raw and my chest felt bruised from the inside. I pulled into a gas station, jumped out, and staggered around the car, gasping for air. The humming faded the moment I opened the door. Inside, the vents whispered silence like nothing had happened. I didn't drive Mission Road for weeks after that. But here's the thing, I've heard it again. Not always. Just sometimes, when I drive alone at night and the air conditioner kicks on, the vents push out more than just air. A low drone, the opening bars of a hymn I never wanted to hear again. And I catch myself humming along before I even realize I've started. It was the night of May 12, 2022, around 11:30 p.m., when I found myself detoured off Highway 288 just south of Houston. There had been a storm earlier in the evening, one of those Gulf Coast tempests that starts with heat lightning and ends with sheets of rain so thick the wipers can't keep up. By the time I left a friend's place near Pearland and started heading back toward Angleton, most of the storm had rolled east. The radio was warning of flash floods on certain feeder roads, and sure enough, a patrol car blocked the southbound lanes near Manville, with flares forcing everyone off at a service road. The rain had lightened to a mist, the kind that makes the world look smeared under the orange glow of sodium streetlights. I was driving my silver Tacoma, the cab still smelling faintly of wet jacket and old coffee, when I followed the line of red taillights veering onto a detour that wound toward a low-lying frontage road. If you've ever been on those stretches of 288 at night, you know the way the floodwaters pool in the flat prairie fields on either side? The headlights make it look like two endless black mirrors. What I didn't expect, though, was how the water behaved once I left the safety of the main highway. The first 100 yards or so weren't bad. There were a couple of sedans ahead of me, their taillights smeared crimson on the wet pavement, sending little wakes through ankle-deep water. But as we crawled further along, the lanes dipped into a stretch of deeper runoff. That's when I saw it. The water wasn't just standing there like floodwater usually does. It was moving, but not in a way I can explain with drainage or wind. It looked like the water was retreating from our headlights, pulling back in ripples as if afraid of the beams cutting through it. Then, the moment we passed, it surged back in behind us, slapping against bumpers like it was trying to push us along. At first, I figured it was my tired eyes playing tricks, reflections from the guardrails or the shifting beams of other cars. But when the sedan two ahead of me slowed to a crawl, its brake lights glowing, I saw the water shiver away from the halo of its headlights just like it had with mine. It wasn't normal. I turned off the radio. My wipers squeaked across the glass. For a few seconds, it was only the hum of my engine and the shallow roar of water. That was when I realized I couldn't hear the frogs or the cicadas anymore. Anyone who's driven those Texas backroads at night knows the sound like the whole countryside buzzing. But it was gone, silent except for us. The sedan in front of me tapped its brakes, hesitated, then kept going. The driver must have felt it too. I gripped the wheel tighter and muttered out loud, half to convince myself it's just runoff, just pushing around. I remember checking the time on the dash, 11:47. The detour was supposed to loop back to 288 in less than 10 minutes. I thought about calling my friend just to tell him what I was seeing, but I didn't. I didn't want to sound crazy. As we pushed on, the road narrowed between two drainage ditches that were swollen up to the edge of the asphalt. My high beams picked out floating debris branches, a half-submerged plastic cooler, something that looked too much like a shoe. The water on the road kept parting in that strange way, like a curtain drawn aside as I approached, then crashing against my rear tires the second I passed. Each slap against the bumper was harder than the last, like it was shoving at me. That was when my phone buzzed in the queue folder. A text. I glanced down, no name, just a number I didn't recognize. The message read, "Do not stop." Swear my stomach dropped straight through the seat. My hands were shaking. I looked around, half expecting one of the other cars to be pranking me somehow. But the sedan ahead just kept crawling. And the one behind me, an older Chevy Malibu, was far enough back that I could barely make out its driver. I told myself it was some kind of spam message, random timing. But when I looked back up at the road, the sedan ahead jerked to the left suddenly, as if dodging something. Its headlights swung across the flooded shoulder. And for just a split second, I saw what looked like a figure standing ankle-deep in the water on the edge of the road. Not waving, not moving, just standing. Then the beam swung back, and the figure was gone. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield. I kept repeating in my head, "Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving." The sedan ahead picked up speed after that, like the driver was spooked too. I pressed the accelerator a little, harder, just enough to keep pace. That was when the water started to surge stronger against my truck, pushing me rightward toward the ditch. I fought the wheel, heart hammering, as my Tacoma slid a foot closer to the water's edge before regaining traction. I shouted out loud, "What the hell is this?" And then my phone buzzed again. Same number. Don't look back. I didn't want to. God help me. I didn't. But some awful reflex made me flick my eyes to the rearview mirror anyway. The Malibu's headlights were swaying like the car was fishtailing. But that wasn't what froze my blood. It was the shape rising out of the floodwater behind it, something tall, black against the pale reflections, its outline breaking the surface like it had been submerged there all along. For an instant, the water didn't touch it at all, parting around it just like it had from my headlights. Then the Malibu's lights were swallowed in spray as the car jerked sideways, and when the road straightened again, it was gone. Just gone. I slammed my foot down, my tires spitting water, chasing the sedan ahead as it disappeared around a curve. My phone buzzed one last time. Keep driving. By the time I reached the on-ramp that fed back onto 288, the water was only a slick sheen on the pavement, no longer shoving at me, no longer pulling away from the beams. The sedan ahead tore onto the highway without signaling, taillights dwindling fast into the distance. I pulled onto the shoulder, chest heaving, hands locked on the wheel until the shaking passed enough to breathe. My phone screen was blank. No missed calls, no saved messages from any unknown number. Nothing. Like those texts had never existed. When I finally made it home, I parked in the driveway and just sat there in the quiet cab. The rain had stopped completely. The air smelled of wet earth and asphalt. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. And sometimes, when I drive that stretch of 288 late at night, still feel it the way the water on the shoulder seems to quiver, like it's remembering. I've never told anyone in person about that night, not until now. Because deep down, I think whatever was in that flood is still out there, waiting for another detour. And if you ever find yourself rerouted off 288 in the middle of the night, With the floodwater pressing against your doors and the world gone silent, remember this: if your phone buzzes and the message says, "Don't look back," you better do exactly what it says. It was early May when I drove through Childress, Texas, on my way from Amarillo to Wichita Falls. The day had been hot, the kind of dry panhandle heat that seeps into your skin even through the glass of your truck. By the time dusk crept across, the sky, the horizon bruising into purples and deepening blues, I was tired enough to start looking for a place to pull off for the night. I wasn't in a rush, and I preferred avoiding motels when I could. I liked pulling off somewhere quiet, away from traffic and sleeping in the cab. That was how I found the old way station just outside Childress, maybe 8 or 10 miles past the city line, near where the scrubland gives way to long, flat stretches of cotton fields. The building looked abandoned but not ruined, just weather-beaten and empty. The low, flat-roofed structure sat back from the road, the way pad stretching out like a sun-bleached scar across the gravel lot. The sign was still there, the green paint faded and peeling. Texas Depot of Transportation Way Station. A single floodlight on a bent pole leaned over the lot, its bulb flickering weakly, throwing a pale cone that buzzed with moths. I thought it was perfect. No trucks, no people, just the stillness of an empty roadside building. I pulled up onto the scale pad, partly out of habit. I'd driven long enough that I sometimes still ran my rig onto way stations just to feel that shudder under the tires. But as soon as I rolled across the center of the pad, the squat little box beside the building hummed to life. It startled me, the way the thing buzzed and clicked like it was still wired to something. I rolled down my window, leaned out, and saw the paper feed spool chattering. I climbed out of the cab and walked over, boots crunching on gravel. The box was the kind of cheap metal cabinet you'd expect gray paint, rust bleeding at the edges, and a slot for the ticket. Against all logic, it spat out a slip of paper into the tray. I picked it up, half smiling at the absurdity. The paper was warm, like it had just come from a receipt printer at a gas station. On it, in blocky black dot matrix letters, was my gross weight, 13,920 pounds. Below it, another line labeled simply, AFTER 12,880 pounds. I stood there, frowning. I wasn't hauling anything. My truck was a Ford F-250, not a semi. The gross weight made sense, but the after didn't. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I crumpled the slip, tossed it in the cab, and shook it off. Old machines spit out garbage. That's what I told myself. The lot was quiet, except for the cicadas buzzing in the weeds. The sun had dipped below the horizon by then, leaving just that lingering amber glow that bleeds into the earth. I killed the engine, reclined the seat, and cracked the windows for air. The night was warm, heavy with that dusty panhandle smell, sun-baked dirt, faint whiffs of mesquite. I drifted off listening to the hum of crickets and the occasional truck, passing on 287. I woke up maybe 2 hours later, my throat dry, the cab stifling. The floodlight outside still buzzed, and moths beat themselves against my windshield. I sat up to take a swig from my water bottle and noticed the faintest vibration under my feet. Not like an earthquake, more like the subtle hum of machinery deep underground. I listened hard, leaning toward the door. The way pad outside glowed faintly, just a pale shimmer along the seams, like light leaking through a crack. I told myself it was leftover luminescence from the floodlight. But when I opened the door and stepped out, I could feel that the pad was warm. Not just surface heat, but a pulsing warmth, as if something alive throbbed under the concrete. I didn't want to admit I was spooked, so I walked back to the box. The printer tray was empty, but the roller clicked faintly, like it wanted to feed another ticket. I tapped it and whispered, "Don't start." like I was talking to a dog sniffing at something it shouldn't. That's when it whirred again and spit out another slip. My hand shook a little as I pulled it. Same black letters. GROSS 13,920. LB's AFTE are 11,760 pounds. I stood in the gravel, the ticket trembling between my fingers. There wasn't just some random malfunction. The number was dropping, like something was taking weight off me. I thought about what I'd left in the cab, just my duffel, a half-eaten sandwich, the water bottle. Nothing worth more than £1. Or two, the number on that slip had dropped over 1,000. I backed away, ticket still in my hand. A cool wind stirred across the lot, though the air had been still all night. I swear I smelled something sweet and rotten, like fruit left too. Liquefy in the sun, the floodlight flickered and hummed louder. I climbed back into the cab and locked the doors, feeling ridiculous. Locked doors wouldn't mean a damn thing if this was electrical trickery, or if some squatters were hiding in the building. But I felt watched, like the scrubland around me had eyes. I must have dozed off again out of sheer exhaustion, because I woke to the sound of the printer running. I sat up, disoriented, heart pounding. Through the windshield, I saw the box, lit in the pale floodlight, spitting out a long ribbon of paper that coiled on the gravel. I grabbed the flashlight from under the seat, stepped out barefoot onto the lot, and picked up the strip. My breath caught. The slip wasn't just one line. It was dozens, scrolling down in that blocky dot matrix print. GROSS 13,920 pounds. After 10,620 pounds, AFTER 9,580 pounds, AFTER 8,540 pounds, AFTER 7,500 pounds, AFTER 6,460 pounds. It kept going, line after line, each one lower. The ink smudged like the printer could barely keep up. The last entry, fresh and dark, read AFTER -0 pounds. I dropped the strip like it was burning my hand. The warm hum of the pad beneath my feet intensified. And for the first time, I heard something beneath it, a hollow sound, almost like breathing. A long exhale rising up through the concrete. I sprinted back to my truck, heart pounding, and cranked the engine. The tire screeched on gravel as I tore off the pad. In the mirror, I saw the strip of paper whip in the wind, scattering across the lot like pale snakes. The floodlight went dark all at once, leaving only the red glow of my taillights against the building. I didn't stop until I was well past Quanah, headlights washing over empty fields. My hands shook on the wheel the whole way. When I finally pulled over at a truck stop, I checked the cab for that first ticket I'd crumpled. It was still there on the seat, smoothed out somehow, neat as if I'd never touched it. Only the numbers had changed. GROSS 13,920 pounds, AFTER 12,880 pounds had been replaced. The afterline now matched the last one from that night. AFTER -0 pounds. I don't keep that slip anymore. I tore it up and threw it into a gas station dumpster. But sometimes, I wake in the middle of the night with the feeling of weightlessness, like my body isn't touching the mattress. And every so often, I dream of that pad humming beneath me, waiting for me to step back on. It was the evening of March 2nd, 2022, a Wednesday that had started like any other. I had been driving back from San Angelo after a long day of hauling feed for a friend's ranch. The weather had turned gray in that flat, open way West Texas. Skies sometimes do. A low ceiling of clouds pressed down on Highway 87, the sun gone early. And the air smelled faintly of rain, even though none had fallen. It was about 8:40 p.m. when I left San Angelo, planning to make it home to Brady before 11. The road was quiet, just me, the hum of my old Ford F-150, and the occasional stretch of light from another vehicle. Highway 87 at night is a strange place. It's long, straight in some parts, bending lazily in others, with stretches of nothing but scrubland and the outlines of barbed wire fences in the headlights. I kept the radio low, a talk station fading in and out with static as I drove past. Blank fields and small clusters of lights that marked forgotten towns. The road felt empty, like it belonged to me, and I remember thinking it was almost peaceful in that lonely Texas way. I was sipping on a gas station coffee, gone lukewarm, the kind that tastes like burnt cardboard, when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, they were far back, a pair of high beams cresting a hill and cutting sharp against the dark. Horizon, nothing unusual, just another truck sharing the highway. But then I realized the lights weren't moving at a normal pace. 1 minute they were distant, the next they were swallowing the gap between us. Within seconds, a massive Peterbilt loomed behind me, its grille nearly filling my mirror. No plates on the front, just chrome that caught my own headlights and threw them back distorted. It was too close, riding my tail like I had done something to provoke it. My chest tightened. I tapped the brakes lightly to signal for him to back off, but the truck didn't budge. It only drew closer, the rumble of its engine vibrating through. My cab, I could see every detail in that grille. The chrome wasn't clean, it had smears and scratches, like it had plowed through more than just dirt. And in the reflection, distorted and rippling with the movement of the truck. I saw something that froze me, my own face staring back. Only it wasn't me as I was then. It looked older, years older. Deep lines carved across the forehead, eyes ringed with exhaustion, mouth turned down in a permanent grimace. A version of myself I didn't recognize, but knew instinctively was me, tired, defeated, worn down by something I couldn't name. I blinked hard, gripping the wheel, and when I looked again, the reflection shifted with the movement of the truck, still showing that same beaten-down face staring back at me. I swallowed hard and turned the radio up, trying to drown out the sudden thump of my pulse in my ears. "It's just chrome," I whispered to myself, voice trembling. "Just reflections. Don't be an idiot." But the air in the cab had grown thick, humid, as if the truck behind me was burning fuel into my lungs. I rolled the window down, letting in the cold rush of wind. That's when I heard it. A low horn blast, stretched and warped like it was underwater. It didn't sound like any truck horn I'd ever heard, more like something trying to imitate one, dragging out the sound into something too long, too hollow. I shifted lanes, hoping the Peterbilt would pass, but it mirrored me, staying glued. To my bumper, my knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. The speedometer crept up past 70, then 80. Still, the truck clung to me. Its lights so close they cast long shadows across my dashboard, flickering with every bump in the asphalt. My coffee cup rattled in its holder, and I muttered, "All right, man, pass me already." But it didn't. It never tried, just stayed there, suffocatingly close. After about 10 minutes of this, I spotted a small pullout ahead near a cluster of mesquite trees. I flipped on my blinker and eased off, figuring I'd let it roar past. But when I rolled to a stop on the gravel shoulder, the highway stretched ahead empty. No lights, no engine noise, nothing. The Peterbilt was gone, as if it had blinked out of existence the moment I decided to stop. My hands shook as I killed the radio and sat there, staring at the road. The silence pressed in around me, broken only by the ticking of my cooling engine. I got out, the gravel crunching under my boots, and looked both ways down 87. Nothing but darkness in either direction. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes before I realized how exposed I felt. The night had a weight to it, the kind that makes you feel watched. I climbed back in the truck and locked the doors, forcing myself to breathe slow. "You're tired," I muttered. "You've been driving too long, that's all." But deep down, I knew what I had seen in that chrome. That older, beaten version of me wasn't a trick of the light. I got back on the highway, driving slower. Now, every sense on edge. The road seemed darker, the lines harder to follow, and the clouds above pressed lower. I didn't see the Peterbilt again that night, but twice more I caught strange things in my mirrors. Once, at a bend in the road, I thought I saw headlights dart across the field beside me, keeping pace where there was no road. Another time, I glanced in the side mirror and saw a shadowy shape sitting in the passenger seat just for a split. Second, before the reflection showed only empty fabric again. My chest stayed tight the whole drive back. I made it home to Brady just after 11, stumbling into my house with a headache and a knot in my stomach. I didn't tell anyone about it, not that night, not for weeks. But since then, I've avoided Highway 87 whenever I can. Sometimes, though, it doesn't matter. I've seen those headlights in my rear view on other roads now, usually when I'm driving alone late at night. Always too close, always pressing me forward. And when I do, the reflection in the grill hasn't changed. He's still there, that older version of me, the one who looks like he hasn't slept in years, staring back with hollow eyes. Each time, the face looks a little more familiar, like I'm catching up to it. Like I'm becoming him. I don't know what that Peterbilt wants or why it found me on Highway 87. All I know is that when it does appear, never passes, never leaves until it decides to. And when it does go, it's like it was never there at all. But I can't shake the feeling that one night, when I glance into that chrome grille again, the reflection won't just be me looking older and tired. It'll be me as I am in that moment. Staring back, and I'll realize the truck isn't following me anymore. It's waiting for me. It was the night of August 4th, 2023, a Friday. Around 10:30 p.m., I remember because the weather was clear, and the radio said it was hovering at 83 degrees in Wichita Falls when I pulled out of town. I had been driving US 287 toward Amarillo for work, cutting through the dark expanse of North Texas plains, where the highway stretches flat and featureless except for wheat fields and occasional clusters of mesquite. The air was thick with the smell of dirt and late summer heat, and the crickets buzzed like a low electrical hum outside my rolled-up windows. I wasn't in a hurry. My boss just wanted me in Amarillo before noon the next day, so I figured I'd put in a few hours, find a cheap roadside motel, and finish the rest in the morning. Somewhere past Oclonian, about 10 miles before the Red River crossing, I noticed the first lantern. That's the only way I can describe it. A pale ball of light floating low above the wheat, swaying gently as if someone were walking through the field with an old oil lamp. It wasn't bright like headlights, more muted, like a flicker behind fogged glass. At first I assumed it was a farmer out checking his property, or maybe kids messing with flashlights. I slowed down a little, squinting at it as it drifted along parallel to the highway. There were no houses nearby, no visible fence line, and definitely no side roads leading into that stretch. Still, I told myself, rural Texas is full of strange things. A few minutes later, a second light appeared, then a third. They floated across the wheat in lazy arcs, sometimes dimming, sometimes glowing stronger, like they were taking turns being noticed. I rolled my window down, letting the hot air slap against my face, and listened. No voices, no engines, no crunch of boots or rustling stalks, just the sound of insects and the rush of my own tires on the asphalt. Something about the lights set me on edge. I reached for my phone to maybe record it, but the signal bar was dead flat, and my battery had dipped to 12%. I decided not to waste what little charge I had left. The highway was empty. No headlights behind me, no oncoming traffic ahead. Just me and the lanterns gliding steadily through the fields. When I passed a reflective green sign that said rest area 2 miles, I felt relieved. A chance to stop, stretch, splash water on my face, maybe see the lights from a safer distance. Only, when I came up on where the rest area should have been, there was nothing. No exit, no picnic tables, no pullout. Just solid blacktop running straight into the horizon. I thought maybe I'd misread the sign, so I kept going. Another half-mile later, I saw a gravel turnout on the right, almost hidden. No sign, no trash. Bins, no lamps, just a shadowy pocket carved into the roadside. I shouldn't have stopped, I know that now. But the way the lanterns seemed to angle toward that exact spot, like they were nudging me there, felt almost like an invitation. Against better judgment, I pulled in and killed the engine. Immediately, the world went thick with silence. The crickets stopped. The air felt heavier, as if the weed had leaned closer. I left my headlights on and stepped out. Gravel crunched under my boots, sharp and loud in the stillness. The wheat field beside me glowed faintly in the wash of the beams. And then, as if on cue, the lanterns drifted closer. There were 4 of them now, lined in a crooked row, swaying above the crops no more than 50 yards away. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights didn't cast any glow on the stalks below them, and they didn't bob like a flashlight carried by someone walking. They hovered with an unnatural steadiness, as if suspended from invisible strings. My mouth had gone dry. I whispered out loud to myself, "It's just swamp gas or something." But my voice sounded small, unconvincing. Then came the sound. A faint, hollow tapping like glass clinking against glass carried over the still air. It grew sharper, closer, until I realized it was echoing from my left. I turned, and there, at the edge of the turnout where the gravel met the dark highway, stood a single lantern, hovering not 2 feet above the ground. My breath hitched in my throat. The others in the field pulsed faintly, in unison, almost like they were breathing. I don't know why I didn't just jump in the truck and peel out. Maybe part of me wanted to prove it was some explainable trick. I took a step toward the nearest lantern, my boots crunching once more. And the thing drifted back smoothly, keeping exactly the same distance from me. I froze, heart pounding. Then, from the wheat field, I heard something else, not tapping this time. A whisper. It wasn't words, exactly. More like a long exhale, stretched thin, threaded with something that almost but not quite formed syllables. My scalp tingled, every hair on my arms lifting. I backed up slowly, reaching for the driver's side door without taking my eyes off the lights. The one on the gravel gave a sudden lurch upward, like it had been jerked on a string, then shot across the turnout and vanished into the field. The others winked out instantly, leaving the wheat swaying under the pale stars. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt like something was crouched just beyond sight, waiting. I yanked the door open, jumped inside, and fired up the truck. The radio came on, but instead of the country station I'd had earlier, it spat static threaded with faint voices. I swear on my life, I heard my own name spoken in that static. Not once, but twice. David. Clear as day, before dissolving into the hiss. My stomach dropped. I slammed the shifter into drive and tore back onto the highway, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop until I reached Vernon. Pulled into the first lit gas station I saw, parked under the fluorescent lamps, and sat there shaking with my forehead pressed to the steering wheel. When I finally worked up the nerve to check my phone, the time said 3:17 a.m. I had no memory of those missing hours. My tank was still 3/4 full. My odometer hadn't budged much, but I couldn't account for what happened between leaving that turnout and hitting town. The next morning, in the daylight, I retraced my route out of sheer stubbornness. I wanted to prove to myself it had been some half-dream, but when I passed the spot, there was no gravel pullout, no scuffed tire marks. Just continuous asphalt, bordered by wheat, golden and ordinary under the sun. I drove back twice to be sure. It simply wasn't there. I told myself I'd let it go, that it was fatigue, a trick of the night. But the problem is, every so often, when I'm driving late on some empty stretch, the radio cuts to static. And beneath that static, I hear faint glass tapping. Sometimes, if I listen too long, I swear I can see faint lanterns glowing at the corners of my headlights, drifting patiently along, waiting for me to follow again. I don't stop anymore.